All right, good morning. Hi, welcome. Welcome to the Center of Excellence. Thank you for joining us in person. We have about 30 some odd of you here with us in the room, and then we have we should have up to 80 participants joining us via Zoom today. So for those of you in the room with me, restrooms are out the door to the left by the elevator, and take another left. Exits are on the far ends of the building. Let's get started. All right, so for those of you on Zoom, you will be muted through the duration of the workshop today. Please enter any questions you may have in the chat box, and we will relay those to the presenter. If you'd like to ask a question, oh, sorry, we are not doing that feature today. We are just doing questions in the chat box. So for those of you who know me, I can't turn down an audience. So this is a little bit about us, the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. We are part of a national organization of finance centers all around the country. They are all housed at universities and have a partnership with the EPA. So we work to enhance the managerial and financial capacity of regional and local governments, nonprofits, and local residents to improve environmental infrastructure services and quality of life. I'm going to break that down for you in the next slide. Oh, first we're going to talk about professional development hours. They are available for those of you attending virtually and in person. If you are here with us in person, we do have a special sign-in sheet out at the registration table. Kristen should have directed it to you. If you are interested in receiving hours, please sign in and sign out using that sheet today. We have submitted the application for PDHs to NYWEA already. It is pending, but we do expect credit for about 1 to 2 hours today. So this is a little bit more about the work that we are currently doing. We work in all of EPA Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Our assistant director, Tess Clark, is actually down in Puerto Rico right now working, so she's very fortunate to be down there. We offer technical assistance, and it's free through the funding that we already receive. And we use a really flexible approach with this technical assistance. And we have a multitude of partners, both in the private and public sector across the country. So this is a little bit more about our approach. As I mentioned, we're super flexible, so we will meet a community wherever they are in the process of applying for funding. Sometimes it's just listening or just bringing people to the table to have a conversation about a change that needs to take place. We've done everything from formatting PDFs to helping with funding applications. So if there's any municipal leaders in the audience today who are requiring any sort of technical assistance, we distributed these handy postcards that have a QR code where you can learn more about accessing our services. You can also check out the US EPA's Water TA webpage and submit a request for assistance there. So I am very excited about this event. Thank you for joining us. This came out of a need that was brought to our attention, where our incredible funding agencies who have joined us today, they want better applications. It benefits everyone if the engineers who are joining us today submit good applications to funding agencies. It's in everyone's best interest to move forward with that. So we have 6 funding agencies who have graciously donated their time to come meet with us today. We're going to start off by talking about preliminary engineering reports and how to strengthen those applications. Then we'll move on to environmental reviews. We'll have lunch. And then I'm very excited for after lunch because we'll actually have the funders come up and tell you their biggest gripes for grant applications gone wrong. So we'll do do's and don'ts for funding applications, and we have a handout for that. And then we'll talk about how all of these agencies work together for co-funding, because we call it a funding quilt. It's not you just go to USDA and get a grant and you're good to go. It's how do all of them come and weave together so that you can fund your project. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica and Will and Liz. You want to come up here? Oh. Avery, do I need to screen share again? Okay. I'll go back to the Zoom. Oops. Sorry. Oops. Jeez. This is only our second time doing this hybrid model. Can you help me get to the Zoom? Oh, thank you. Okay. This is good. Yeah. Okay, great. Come on up. Finally have it figured out for you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica DeDominic. I'm here with USDA RD, and I'm going to give you a little overview of what we're looking for with our preliminary engineering reports. Right, buckle up. Okay, am I hitting this? Okay. All right, so the preliminary engineering report is just one of the two technical documents required in our application. There's the PER, which must be final and stamped by a PE licensed in New York. And it's helpful if it has the health and sanitary documentation with it. So a letter from DOH or your code enforcement officer or a DEC supporting the project, saying that, you know, this project is necessary and will help the public health of the area. And the environmental report, or the ER, that they'll talk about a little bit later, then that may be a draft. Our format is in the Rust Bulletin 1780-2 and has our requirements in it. There's a link there. If you need that, we can send that to you also. And then other formats, we often see the EFC format, which is fine for us, but we'll likely have to ask for a little bit of, additional information. And myself and my colleague John will take a look at your PER review, probably send you some sort of document asking any questions that we have, and we'll also accept it for financing. Next, okay. A better PER. So here are some things that we notice often that hopefully if we can fix now before they're submitted, we'll have to ask less questions. So the scope, the description versus the cost estimate, they must match. So if in your description you have, it's a pump station, some main, and some other restoration work, but your cost estimate has a tank, some other crazy things, we're going to be like, okay, these don't quite match. Could you clear up, what exactly you're looking for? It has to be consistent with other application documents, including the map showing the existing system and the proposed project. So again, using our system RD apply, if you put in there, something totally different than what your PER says, we'll be, asking about that. The environmental portion of the PER must have a summary of the impacts for alternatives or construction, but we don't need the entire environmental report in the PER, because that's why we also do the environmental review. The alternatives should have a discussion about, what's technically infeasible or too costly, and we'll need to see a life cycle cost analysis to back that up. If it's technically infeasible, we'll need a little bit of reasoning to justify that instead of just saying that. So that also covers the bases. And the costs have to be the same between the application and the PER. There should be a discussion on materials and procurement. So all of our projects must meet open and free competition. So if in your PER you say, we're planning to use this specific brand of hydrant, or this, we want to use ductile iron pipe, we'll let you know that you either need to bid, multiple different types of material to not limit competition, or if it's for a reason like, our whole system is this, like we want to use this for familiarity or like to standardize the system, that's fine with us. We'll just need a written request so we can concur on it. And then the contingency, we need some sort of justification if it's anything other than 10%. Oftentimes we see ones that are 20 or 30% with like a 3% per year inflation factor. We cannot accept that per our national office. We have to see 10%. So we will ask you to revise your construction costs, just so the contingency only shows 10%. And then we need a breakdown of the non-construction or soft costs. So your legal, your engineering fees, and your administration. And your O&M and SLA, or short-lived assets, they need to be for the entire system, not necessarily just the project. And your annual user cost must include the debt service and the O&M. All right. And then, a little bit more, our user connections versus EDUs. We have some engineers who they calculate their own EDUs and put them in. That's fine, but we need to see the connections and the flow data. Just so, because we have a different way of calculating that for our own underwriting. So if we don't see that, we will have to ask for it. And they must be consistent between the PR and the application. But we'll ask for the number of residential connections, the average use per day of residential connection and total residential use, your non-residential connections and vacant parcels, and your total non-residential use. So we'll need that all for underwriting. Like I said, they must match between the PR and RD apply. And yeah, and the PR can have proposed EDUs, like I said, for, the municipal's billing versus RD financing, but we just have a different system of calculating them for our own. Okay. So operation and maintenance costs, we usually see this in like the yearly budget. We'll see the water fund or the sewer fund for the existing system and then the proposed project. And for the proposed project, we want to see it for, what is the total system's O&M cost after the project is complete? Even if it's just, we're repairing some main, it still needs to be for the entire system. The breakdown must match the municipal budget, and then some info on short-lived assets. Again, they have to be for the whole system, not just the project. Sometimes that can vary between, a village system being, much more in-depth versus like a town, like water district. There's examples in that 1780-2 as well. And we like to have them broken down between 0 to 5 years, 6 to 10, and 11 to 15. Anything over 15 years, we do not consider a short-lived asset in the USDA. Okay, so, and then we have Rest Bulletin 1780-26, which was just updated in May of 2023. And this update included the information about Build America, Buy America. And in this document, there's requirements for the contract documents and the engineering agreement. So there's required edits that must be made to our EJCDC documents. Like I said, it includes the domestic preference requirements and a sample language, that's the word I'm looking for, for the certifications for the contractor certification, manufacturer, engineer, our attorney form that has to be signed, and our engineering agreement. Okay, so why does RD use standard contract documents? Like, why can't we just use our own? So the use of the EJCDC with the 1780-26 revisions helps us make sure that all applicable federal requirements are included in the bidding and contract documents. So it helps us cover, all of our bases. It helps us have consistent implementation of our regulations and policies. And if you choose not to use our EJCDC documents and with our edits, the documents need to be reviewed by our Office of General Counsel, and it takes a really long time. So it's much quicker and easier on everyone if we use the standard documents. Okay. And it also, streamlines the review for John and myself and our other RD staff to be able to, check off our list of what we're looking for. Okay, so some future updates to 178026. They're looking to update the engineering E-series, which is your engineering agreement, your other construction documents, your contract documents, small construction contracts for projects less than 500K, procurement series, and a design build series. So that should be, they're working on it down the pipeline. Okay, so everybody's favorite, a little bit of refresher about Build America, Buy America, or we lovingly call BABA. So as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, is all federally assisted infrastructure must comply with BABA, and there are domestic preference requirements. So that includes 100% of your construction materials, all of your iron and steel, which was covered under the American Iron and Steel Act, and manufactured products. So they must be manufactured in the US, and 55% of the components must be manufactured in the US on a cost basis. So the things that aren't covered there are cement, cementitious materials, aggregates, aggregate binding agents, and additives. So pretty much everything needs to be domestic preference. So currently with BABA, we're working under a waiver called the Previously Planned Projects Waiver, or the PPP waiver is what we usually call it. It was approved last June, and it's effective until June 19th of this year. So with that, we must receive requests in time to obligate the funds by that June 19th deadline. So if you have a project that you're working on with us right now, and it's gone to bid, you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to need more money. We need to know ASAP so we could, work on getting this through. But hopefully we've already talked to you if that is the case. This is for the Water and Environmental Program and our Community Facilities Program, projects that were planned prior to May 14th, 2022, which is when BABA went into effect. And for the purpose of this waiver, a previously planned project must meet at least one of the following criteria. So for criteria 1, it's projects where funds were previously awarded and the scope was not increased after May 14th, 2022. So that's typically cost overruns. And criterion 2, the projects must be evidenced by a submittal of a project to USDA prior to the May 14th, 2022 deadline with a significant level of design and engineering, which they've defined as the preliminary engineering report to be a significant level of design and engineering. Or there must be documentation indicating that substantial public engagement for public selection and approval had occurred on or before May 14th. So that would mean if there's any kind of public meeting minutes that show, we discussed the project or it was proposed in front of, the town board or the village board, or just any kind of documentation there that before that May 14th, 2022 deadline, which should be less and less projects now since we're a couple of years past that, but throwing it out there. All right, so BABA documentation, like I said, in the Rest Bulletin 178026, the new version, the 2023, has the sample language for our engineers, contractors, and manufacturer certifications. If you have a project that is not BABA, so is obligated before, or it has one of those waivers, we will ask that you still use the 2020 version of this document because it has all the AIS edits in it. Also, please note, we're handling BABA a little bit differently than we did AIS. We will not be collecting every single certification for every single material on the project. It is the owner's responsibility to collect all the BABA manufacturer certifications and maintain a file in case anyone were to ever come and, want to see that documentation. We will only be collecting the BABA manufacturing certificates for iron and steel products. So just like under AIS, but they'll be BABA ones. And we'll still perform an AIS site visit. While we're there, we might ask to see, some other things that aren't iron and steel, just so we can get pictures, stuff like that. But we'll be primarily looking for iron and steel. And if a project is determined to not be subject to BABA based on obligation date, or if they received a waiver, AIS still applies. So that's not going away. Okay. So a little reminder for our AIS, the American Iron and Steel items that we'll be collecting. We'll have a AIS site visit checklist report. It's not attached. If you need it, I will send it to you. With the AIS materials listed, and if you're using de minimis, we'll also have a sample list in there also for you to fill out. We send that to the engineers so they can fill it out in case we can't get to the site right away before things get in the ground. And that's super duper helpful to us when they help us out. All the AIS manufacturer certifications, pictures of the AIS materials showing the Made in USA stamp, the AIS engineering certification, the contractor certification that we collect at substantial completion, just confirming that, everything that was installed does comply with AIS. And we like to receive all documents via PDFs. Okay. And then an example certification. We're looking for 5 different things on these. A reference to the project and where it was delivered, a specific list of products, your location of manufacturing, so we need to see the city and state, the signature of a company representative down there at the bottom, and some sort of reference to AIS. Doesn't necessarily have to say USDA RD on it. A lot of them say EPA or anything like that, but as long as it says American Iron and Steel requirements are being met, that's good with us. And then a couple example pictures of some good pictures we got with the Made in USA stamp that we'll be looking for. And yeah, thank you so much. I'll pass it along to EFC. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Hi, everyone. All right. So today we're going to talk about the State Revolving Fund Engineering Report Outline. So my name's Liz Ritchie. I represent the engineering division at EFC. So my focus is on wastewater infrastructure for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. All the engineering on the drinking water side is actually done through Department of Health's engineering group. We have Will Grady as well. He'll be adding in as needed on some of these slides, and we'll be talking specifically about the drinking water infrastructure. So to get started, since we do have 2 state revolving fund programs that, the information for a wastewater project and a drinking water project can be different. A lot of it's the same, but we do have 2 engineering report outlines available on our website that kind of tailors to each of the programs that we offer. We also do have a report outline that I'm not going to talk about today, but if you have done work through our Green Innovation Grant Program, GIGP, we also have an outline available for our feasibility studies that kind of talk about the differences for those programs. But today we're going to be focusing more on the engineering report outlines for our what we call our base funding. So when we developed these outlines a few years ago, the intent was to actually mirror RD and other funding agencies' outlines. So Jessica, I actually wouldn't mind talking later about the differences between the 2 and see if we can marry the 2 a little bit better. But the intent is we wanted to provide an outline that can be used by municipalities, regardless of the funding source that you're using, to try to minimize the revisions that maybe would be coming for one agency for another. So a lot of the stuff that you heard about with RD's outline, I would say is that exactly the same for ours. So we're looking for the same level of information. We're going to touch on a couple, highlights for our program that, would likely overlap with RD's, but just things that we want to draw special attention to. But for our funding, we have an intended use plan that we put out every year, and the engineering report is required to list your project on what we call our annual list, which is the universe of projects that can come in for financing in that particular year, or if you're going to apply for grant funding through our programs, we're expecting that same report to be submitted in order to be eligible. So it is one of the, the big key things that we're looking to see. And when we're looking at projects to list on the intended use plan, especially on the clean water side, although I know drinking water does a similar review, we do what we call an acceptability review. So we'll talk about the key items, but we want to make sure the report hits a lot of key elements to make sure it's good enough to be listed on the IUP, because we don't want to put a project on there that's half-baked, for example, and limit the funds that we can offer municipalities that maybe had a really good report and a project they want to advance forward. So these are the elements similar to what you heard about in the last presentation that we're really looking for. Got to be stamped by PE. Report needs to talk about identifying what the problem is the municipality is trying to solve. Really focusing on the alternative analysis. We want the consultant to be putting together a good report for the municipality to identify what their options are and make a recommendation of what they think the solution is and lead to a capital improvement project. Should talk about what the total project cost is, because for EFC and NRD too, we use this report to justify what the financing can pay for. So we want to know that the project's been developed and it matches your total project cost that we're going to give you financing or grant for. We're looking for some level of information for project location maps. For EFC, we do have an engineering report certification, which really is just the firm saying, yes, you know, we looked at all the options and we are giving you our recommendation of what the best alternative is, that's a EPA requirement that we have to put in our reports. And then we also do a smart growth assessment. I'll say actually as something to see in the future, that smart growth assessment, we've transitioned into our application specifically. So that it will likely be seen dropped out of our engineering report outline. We're not going to ask for it at this stage. We'll ask for it when you apply for financing or grant to try to limit how many forms, you know, EFC is asking for you to submit. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I know that we had talked about it in the last presentation, but again, we're looking for a report that has enough information to really justify why the project is being done, what is being built, prove to us that the project will be successful. Because this report is the basis of our financing. So, let's see, some additional items I'll kind of focus on the bottom section that, you know, we are also looking for a present worth life cycle analysis if you're doing different alternatives. I will say that our outline, it's meant as a guide because not all projects require the same level of information. For example, a replacement in kind project, an alternative analysis maybe doesn't make sense if you're just replacing or repairing pipe. You don't have a whole lot of options. You got to fix the I&I. But if you're upgrading a treatment plant, there may be more documentation that we're looking for in terms of, well, did you look at new treatment technologies to address your permit issue or new permit limits that are coming from DEC? You know, based on the size of your plant, did you look at an SBR? Did you look at MBR? Like, what makes sense for your facility? And we may be looking for more information for a more complicated project than I'll say an easier project, but they're all, you know, complicated in their own way. But we focus a lot on flood elevation. So we're going to talk about that later in the presentation in more detail. You know, discussions on whether your project has an enforcement action with DEC and kind of understanding how that might drive a project or what your recommendation is. And a good one I would say to highlight is sizing and design calculations. We understand that you're going to do a final design and you're going to do a basic design report for some projects, and a lot of that will come later. But for the PER stage, because we are looking for enough engineering to have been done to justify that the project will be successful. You know, for example, we have quite a few projects that are recommending to shut down a plant, convert it to a pump station, and send it to a different facility as part of consolidation. Well, we would probably want to know that you've looked at hydraulically how the pump stations can operate to get to the other treatment plant, that it's actually going to work. So we would probably be looking for some form of preliminary calculations for the pump station and force main size. Whereas maybe another project, you know, if you're going to do more detailed review during the final design, that might make more sense. But sometimes consultants kind of skip over that, assuming everything's going to happen later. So just keep in mind, we might be asking for more information earlier, and that's the reason why. So this is really just a reference slide. In our outline, we include just a list of the technical standards we do expect consultants to look at. I'll just kind of mention on the clean water side, we do have a lot of overlap between 10 state standards and TR16. We usually like to recommend the more stringent of the two. So TR16, for example, is a lot more detailed than 10 state standards. So we see a lot of consultants may defer to 10 states because that's been the standard for so long. Just keep in mind that our EFC engineers are looking at TR16 for wastewater projects and may be asking for those requirements to be met over 10 states in some cases. We use the stormwater design manual for all of our green infrastructure projects and stormwater projects. So that one comes into play quite often. And then drinking water has their own set of standards. Any that you want to highlight, or anyways, but they're there, you know, the ones that we might be referring to when we do our designs, when I do our review of your design. Okay, so just a couple things I wanted to highlight on alternative analyses. Again, not all projects may have one of these, but we are expecting some level of analysis of costs and explanation of, you know, why you're recommending one alternative over another. Really, we're trying to avoid a situation where sometimes we can tell a community or consultant has already has in the mind what alternative they want to use, and they don't do a really good job of justifying why it's the best fit for the community. So we want to just make sure that you are, you know, advising your client to the best that you can of, well, these are your options. Here are the pros and cons. This is what we think you should do, and put all the information in the report, but in guiding them towards what, you know, they want to move forward with. So, you know, we recognize that maybe some alternatives are just technically infeasible. Cost could even be one of those. It's astronomically more expensive than something else. And maybe at the end of the day, it's better to just repair what you have versus building something new. That's fine. We just need information in the report to justify it or explain it. And this is kind of key on our projects that get engineering planning grant money that we give to developer report. The project has to recommend a capital project. This comes up a lot with I&I studies where we give them grant money to develop a report. They do all the field work, they present it in a report, and then the recommendation is, we didn't find anything, you should do more studies. We're going to get back to you and say, that's no good. You have to do more field work, or you have to justify something for a capital project. We could accept a report, I suppose, if you evaluated your whole system and you're like, you know what, not that bad. We don't really have to do any repairs. That's fine. But if the report says we have to do more field work, we won't give you the second half of your grant. You'll have to, we gave you the grant with the understanding that you would identify a project to do. So that comes up quite a lot. So I just want to really highlight that. Okay, and I have 3 slides on flood elevation considerations because we comment on this a lot in reports, and I just want to kind of make people aware of a few things. So on the wastewater side, we refer to TR16 a lot because they updated it in 2016 for a lot of criteria about how to protect your infrastructure for flood events. So critical equipment need to be protected 3 feet above the 100-year flood elevation. And critical is usually like your generator, disinfection systems, any of your primary treatment. And then your non-critical equipment needs to be protected 2 feet above the 100-year flood elevation. And really, new facilities should be providing uninterrupted operation of all units during a flood. So we're asking a lot of comments during the report phase just to make you aware that this requirement is here. And there's also the State Community Risk and Resiliency Act, which uses those same limits, but they're also focused on impacts of climate change and coastal communities and how the wave action and things like that may impact new infrastructure. So just keep in mind, like with reports, that you should be considering this for any new infrastructure that you're proposing. We focus on it a lot more at the plan and spec phase because now you're actually putting on paper where things are going to be installed. So just be prepared that, you know, if you can't meet those, which TR16 does kind of give you a little bit of flexibility if it's just going to be cheaper to replace the equipment than it is to raise it 5 feet, you know, to get out of the flood zone. We need to, you know, have a conversation about that before we would approve any documents to construction. But I'm hoping people are familiar with the FEMA flood insurance maps, but we use that. We expect those maps to be included in your report and state what the 100-year flood elevation is related to where the work is being done. This quick chart was really just to, hopefully that's readable, but it's for reference later, just putting on paper the CARA, the Community Risk Resiliency Act that New York put out a few years ago versus the TR16 guidance. The CARA guidance would more related to your drinking water infrastructure since it's otherwise not covered in TR16, but just kind of highlights the critical and non-critical equipment threshold related to the 100-year flood elevation. And you know, this is more just to provide thoughts as you're developing the report. You know, we talk about raising equipment, but there might be other things that a community could explore as part of their report phase or design phase of, you know, the TR16 and CARA really talk about protecting equipment that can be defined in different ways. You can move the infrastructure to a different location. You could elevate them. Maybe pumps could be designed to be submersible, flood barriers, watertight enclosures. So just thinking in terms of like, all right, well, if we're spending millions of dollars to build this equipment, the state and federal government is giving you this money, we expect it to be protected, as we know that climate change is going to make these rain events worse and more frequent. So just making sure you're thinking about, well, if I'm installing this, how can I protect it for the future? And just giving an example of a project that we funded for the city of Binghamton, their plant was flooded twice within a couple years of each other. And we just finished a couple years ago, but they ended up rebuilding their entire plant. And their solution was to install flood wall along the Susquehanna River. So, you know, they probably, you know, did other provisions inside the plant, but that was their solution with FEMA. They, instead of replacing stuff that was damaged at the plant, they were approved for an alternate project with FEMA, and they built a flood wall that was several feet above the 500-year flood in the case of how they've been damaged in the past. All right, before I turn it over to Will for a few slides, this is relatively new for our outline as of last year and something that EFC is focusing on, mostly because we're taking an interest in the affordability of projects and trying to understand what the impacts of your project is on user rates. That we are asking for more information in our reports for cost per user information. So, you know, the report should include some discussion of the number of users or ratepayers responsible for paying back the project. I think projects undergone by towns, or it's pretty common that you're already including the equivalent dwelling unit, EDUs, to determine your service area. But like cities and villages, that was information we weren't necessarily getting. So this is something that if you had submitted a report to EFC a few years ago and now we're finally reviewing it for financing, we're likely going to start asking about, because it's in our current outline, even if it wasn't required when you developed the report a couple years ago. So just keep in mind that we're going to want to see information of what the total project cost is and how it's being paid by the users of the system. And if you have any questions on this, please reach out. We're kind of trying to better explain this to our communities because it is a little bit new. And we realize not all communities use the term EDUs. So we're really just looking for the number of users or connections in a system that are using the infrastructure. All right. Will, let me take it over.
Okay, so I'm gonna get into just some additional considerations we have there, which the total project budget, something that's very important for our applications for funding, is that it is a current budget. Like, even if you say have a report that's, I don't know, 5 years old and you haven't implemented that project and it's still the same scope, we would still want a current cost estimate that is PE stamped. We could ask for something like an engineering report amendment that's just like a 1-page memo detailing updated costs and details there. The project schedule too should be current in all the reports. And this is an EFC requirement that I think there are discussions with drinking water as well of likely moving forward with something similar. But EFC now requires a 60-day review period of plans and specs prior to bid advertisement. Another thing to mention is just if the report includes all scope items, and this is just important that the report should clearly define the scope. Like if the report does a lot, we've received reports previously that have done a lot of analysis and kind of recommended a bunch of different things, but then never decided on what clearly the scope or what they intend to do there. So the scope has to be clearly defined, and should the application and differing documents like the report and the application document should also match. Yeah, and then the last one is confirming the scope matches the environmental review and bond resolution. We've, in terms of like the WEA program that we deal with, we have found applications to be unacceptable because the seeker environmental review had a differing scope than what the actual project was. Like say if the project scope detailed like water main replacement, a storage tank, treatment plant upgrades, and the seeker itself only included water main replacement or something that was more limited than the actual scope that is being performed. So make sure the scope matches between all documents. And then now I'll just get into some drinking water specific considerations for engineering reports. With new water districts, we would want a description of the properties included in the newer expanded water districts. This should detail the number of exact service connections that are being proposed with the extension or new water district. It should detail residential versus non-residential properties. It should discuss consolidation of existing public water systems. With that, I would say is an important too with our scoring criteria when we evaluate the engineering reports. If there is a consolidation of an existing public water system, we would want to know that because that would give more weight to the score for that. And we would generally want a demand estimate for the water district area as well. Like I mentioned earlier, we want a clear project scope and description of the project need. We want to see a good alternatives analysis and a clear project scope, and we want to see sufficient like engineering done that would demonstrate that the proposed project will address the project need and the problem that is being described. Another thing that is important in our scoring of projects and evaluation of projects is just documentation of violations. This could be things like local health department sanitary survey reports, local health department, just letters documenting the known issues within the system. This is something we take into account like very highly when we evaluate engineering reports. And as I mentioned, sanitary survey reports that cite system deficiencies, that's part of the documentation we're looking for. Like we want to see that the problems you're describing in the report are documented issues that the local health departments would like addressed. And then the final one again is just that the project budget is up to date and current. Like I mentioned previously, we need to see a current estimate because as we know, like construction costs rise. So, and I'll hand it back to Liz for the last couple.
Yes, we're almost done. So just a couple takeaways. There's a lot of overlap with some of these, but just a few things I wanted to highlight for wastewater projects. For new collection system or treatment plants, just doing a good job to explain how the wastewater flows are estimated, confirming the downstream hydraulic capacity, connecting to existing systems. That's really important for consolidation projects and something that we do want to see at the preliminary engineering side, not at final design. Like we understand things might be tweaked, but again, this really stems from the idea that we want to know that the project you're proposing before we enter a financing is going to be successful. And a lot of that is your community that you're going to consolidate with. Do they even know your project is happening? Have they been approached and discussed that and do they have sufficient capacity at their plant to accept your project? Where are you connecting in the collection system? Do any upgrades need to happen in the collection system? So we expect all that to be really discussed at the report phase. We understand that some things are going to change later on, and it's fluid. Things happen all the time during design, but we do want to know some of that's happened up front. And I already talked about that last. Oh, no, I didn't talk about that. So if you are, for new systems, you're going to build a new treatment plant, we would expect that you're discussing that with your regional or central office DEC staff to determine, well, what are the draft speedies permit limits expected? Because again, those limits are really going to dictate what type of treatment plant you're going to build, and the type of treatment plant you're going to build is going to dictate how expensive your project is. So we do expect that conversation and those limits have been received by DEC. So what you're proposing is likely what you're going to move forward with. Right. So report should provide some discussion of sewer service area, talk about any speedy permit limits or upcoming updates that might be expected, modifications to your treatment plant. If you are addressing a consent order or compliance schedule, just provide some details about how your proposed project is actually going to fix something or address something that was specifically in your consent order. Similar to what Will said about drinking water project scoring, we use compliance enforcement action to increase your SRF project score and your WEA project score. So sometimes if you just mention, well, the community has a consent order, we might have trouble figuring out whether your project is directly going to fix something in the consent order. Usually we can talk to DEC and kind of figure it out, but it's a lot better if you can really highlight beyond a doubt that your project's going to address something in your consent order. And, it's consolidation. That's not my. Wow, sorry, that's my phone. That's my phone, guys. Which confused me because my phone never has a ringer on. So yeah, and the last thing is just, is consolidation feasible? Maybe that is something that you should consider, and for new systems, or if you're now I'm distracted. If your plant is old, then maybe you want to look at that, and something we want to follow up on. So I'll just, a little plug real quick on one of our programs for the Clean Water program is that we do have an engineering planning grant available for the development of a report. So this is really geared towards disadvantaged communities. I think it's systems less than 300,000 people, and has a median household income less than 70,000. I believe that's right, but we do have information on our website. We are not out for applications yet, but usually that happens in the summer. And the grant's available to help develop a report with the hope that you would list the project on our intended use plan. The outline is exactly the same. All the criteria that we just talked about would match. So take advantage of the program if you haven't already. Thanks.
Funny, of all the phones to ring. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes. Yeah. So the question was a 60-day, tell me again. 60-day review period as required. Is that expected to be at full completion or at 90% design? Yep.
Plans, we just. No, thank you. Thank you. So I'll start over. So it is EFC's preference that they're as close to bid ready as possible. 95% might be okay. But we wouldn't do our technical approval until we had bid ready sets. The reason why we want it as close to design ready is because we review so many projects and are under a lot of time commitment. So we're trying to get stuff earlier so we have an opportunity to comment before bids are going out. But, I understand that, once sets are done, you want to immediately put them out to the street. So losing 2 months can affect your schedule a lot. So, I would say like 95% would probably be better, something that's close, but we just don't want to, keep issuing comments if we see something different at the final bid phase that maybe you didn't have at the 90%. Just to clarify, that is when we say it's an EFC preference, right now it's written in the clean water intended use plan for projects. It's currently not in the drinking water intended use plan. But I would say, DOH would also hope to get stuff earlier, even if there isn't a hard, fast deadline in there. And that's mostly because if you go too far down the line and you don't have our terms and conditions, or you don't have things that are approvable, it jeopardizes funding. So we're just trying to get things earlier if we can. The question was, does the 60-day review period start over if you issue comments? No. So we just want to get it 60 days before you advertise to give us an opportunity to look at and issue comments. If we issue comments and you've already like say we're delayed because we're backed up, and we may be because we have so many projects right now getting grant funding and we're very busy. If you advance to bidding or even award contracts as we're issuing comments, we would just expect them to be revised in either your bid addenda or as a change order if it's significant enough after the fact. But yeah, we're not going to continuously push the can down the line. Yeah.
So when it comes to scoring projects, if you have two identical projects, right, two different communities, same exact project, but one of the communities has, say, authorized preliminary design, paying for that out of pocket, or maybe survey or some initial phase of the design. When it comes to scoring, does the community that's taken that step ahead, does that carry any weight for that community compared to the first community who maybe hasn't done anything?
So with that, in terms of like the drinking water state revolving fund scoring system, that's detailed in the IUP and is pretty just rigid in what it is. Something like an engineering report or engineering agreement being executed would not affect that scoring. But in terms of the WEA grant program, we do take into account project readiness. So a community that has like an engineering or grant agreement for preliminary design or construction or other phases of work would demonstrate more project readiness and generally have a higher score for our WEA evaluation.
And as I head to the back of the room here, just a reminder for our virtual attendees to enter your question in chat.
So Liz, I think you hinted at this earlier, but most municipalities like to have one PER that covers all funding applications. And we're getting feedback from EFC that we should be carrying a contingency of 25, 30% across the project. But then we're getting feedback from RD that they only want 10%. So it's pretty hard to show two different cost estimates for the same exact project. Can you guys, and that might develop further conversations, I guess.
Who wants to take that one? Oh, wow. Oh, I didn't expect to fight over it. Okay, Jeff.
I'm John Helgren from USD Real Development. And I'd say that, first of all, that is an interesting question, only because we know we get applications. And I think, this is what we hear, Liz, is that EFC says they have to have 30%. And you can have an inflationary factor. Our regulations actually say no, that we can't see a project that has greater than 10% contingency and no inflation factor. So there's an issue. The best way that we find to work it out is yeah, give us a different cost estimate. Go ahead and do the report, PER, go with their stuff. But at the end, I mean, I would hope it wouldn't change the overall project cost, but we'd want to say, just give us a different cost estimate that adjust your construction item costs and knock it down to 10% and don't give us an inflationary factor. Because if we present that to our national office, they'll throw it back in our face. It isn't going to happen. We're not going to be able to fund that project. So we got to figure out a way to do it. And that's the only way we know right now. So I don't, Brenda has anything else. So I think just having a separate cost estimate, it's okay with us. We'll just say, here's our USDA cost estimate because we're readjusting it, and you can leave the other one okay if you want. But the overall project cost, I would hope, would be the same. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and actually this is why this event is so important. I actually didn't know you guys were limited to only 10%. So that was something I jotted down on a piece of paper. I'm like, maybe we should talk about this later. So the reason why EFC has started, we don't require at the PER stage, we make the recommendation that you should consider 30%, mostly because since COVID, we've seen cost estimates skyrocket, and we see a lot of municipalities going out to bid, costs come in high, and then we have to amend your financing. And that costs the municipality money to amend the financing. So we're trying to get ahead of it by recommending to the consultant that like we sometimes see 10%, 15%, 20%, and it seems like we can't find the right number at a report development stage of what makes sense. So we've started making the recommendation really just to get the buffer in your budget so that if we develop your cost estimate and we close your financing, we're hoping you don't need to do an amendment later for more money, but clearly we don't want to strife for D projects because we do co-fund projects all the time. So that's an interesting one. So anyways, that's my food for thought, why we differ.
Current budgets for your cost estimate?
Yeah, so we've started to use 6 months in some of our grant applications when we define current, and something that we do try to reach out if we have a report that's for our intended use plan, we look at like a 5-year report. Anything older than a 5-year report is too old. But I think, with the market changing so much for project costs, your budget may change pretty quickly in a year or so. So we just want consultants or communities to revisit their budget. If they look at it and the costs haven't really changed, they can just let us know that, this budget's still good based on our numbers. But we just want communities to consider and look at it, because sometimes projects get put on the shelf and the estimate doesn't change. And then they're surprised when they go out to bid and the project is, several million over budget. So we're just trying to make people more aware of it so that they're revisiting it more often. Because I think we're just in that world where we have to look at it more often than maybe we used to.
All right, last question.
So to go back to the RD cost estimate. So most municipalities are going to have one bond resolution for $1 amount that includes that potentially 30% contingency for EFC. Would it be acceptable in the construction cost estimate to carry a, say, miscellaneous work allowance item that happens to be equal to that 20% contingency number and then have 10% contingency accounted for later?
Understood, but yeah, so you want to make sure your bond resolution has the same amount. So it depends on how your bond resolution is written too. So because I understand there's multiple ways to do it. So look at that. But I'd say if we saw an item that said miscellaneous something that's probably bigger than 5%, we're gonna ask anyways, what the heck is this? And define it. And if you can't define it as an actual item that's going to be for construction, we're gonna question it. We're gonna have to, because it won't fly with our people. So.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our second session. And we're screen sharing is paused. Okay.
I'll stand up here.
So I just told John Helgren, the answer to that last question is just have a funding agency death match. Whoever wins, that's the rule should go by. Oh.
You can talk. You would say that.
All right, morning, everybody. I know some of your faces. I'm Charlie Fillion, Program Director with the Office of Community Renewal. Glad to be here. Thanks to the other EFC, as I refer to you guys, for putting this together. I'm going to talk to you today about conducting your NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act review. What HUD, we fall into the Part 58. So we'll, how do I click? Oh, all right, down here. Okay. Right. So want to talk to you about familiarizing yourself with what we call our environmental review record and establishing that and going through the design process. Oh, okay. And just establishing this and how we are defining and what you need to have ready when you're ready to come in and apply for funding. So again, we are subject to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. One of the good things about this is if you are working with one of my co-funding partners, CDBG, we require you to, I have to be last in to your plan of finance. Hopefully you have gone through other funding sources. If you've gone through USDA RD and you've completed NEPA with them, I will probably accept most of the documentation of what they've prepared already. The same thing with the EFC. If you're going through them and you've done the NEPA review through EFC, I can probably accept most of their documentation as well. So it should facilitate that process a little bit. Because again, we also are in New York State. I'm not going to delve into seeker, but again, the projects are still subject to seeker. If you're going through the review process, you need to do the lead agency declaration. Even if you don't know if CDBG is going to be involved in the process, you should still be reaching out to us for a consultation for lead agency designation. We are the review authority, but we make you the city, town, village, county that's applying and receiving the funds. You're what we call the responsible entity. So you are ultimately responsible for establishing the record. We've got, I know that this can be a little clunky trying to navigate through our website. It's better than it used to be. If you're laughing, so you must agree with me. It's a little clunky to navigate. But everything that you need is right here. The designations, the forms, the consultations. Don't be afraid to reach out to us. I've got a lot of new staff. I'm not sure if I'm chasing people away or if they're just lucky enough to get promoted through the agency, but I've lost 2 good people in the last year. They're still with the agency, but they've just moved up in positions. But again, and we've got the environmental review checklist. Again, I will help you every step of the way. I know Corey and Greg, I'm going to pick on you two. I think I've worked with both of you quite a bit, and I think that that's a fair assessment that I'll work with you. The last thing I want to do is have somebody go through the process and put together an environmental review that's, you just give me the forms, nothing else. And we'll get into everything that we need, but I'll talk to you and I'll help you put this together. We've got some good tools. HUD's been putting these out. So the NEPA Assist, you're going to distribute this right to participants. So these are hyperlinks that I've put in here. The NEPA Assist is a really cool tool because you can go into it. It's kind of an ArcGIS based navigation tool, and it gives you all the potential maps that you might need. So flood maps, agricultural maps, endangered species, the whole 9 yards. It lets you pull each of these into the area that you're working in. The flood hazard map is becoming a big issue for us. Again, we want you to use the navigation tool. If you're not familiar with it, we can walk you through it. It's a great tool again to use. You're literally putting in the physical address of the location of where you're doing work, bringing it up, and we can determine at that point if you're in a floodplain or not, and what the mitigation efforts are that you're going to have to take care of. Again, these are all available on my website. If you're having trouble finding them, they're either in the grant administration manual or we've got a resource guide on the first page, on one of the first tiles. Again, just familiarize yourself with these. Again, we talked about the secret form, the full EAF. These are all things, this is all stuff that I need to be included in your environmental review. So as you're going through this and you're looking at that statutory checklist, and this is where you have to check yes or no as to whether or not the regulation applies, yes or no. And then if it's yes, then what is your mitigation? And that's what I need to see. If it's no, you still need to explain to me. You can't just put in NA, we won't accept it. You still have to tell me why it's not applicable. And you do that by backing up. If you're not in a coastal barrier, give me a map that shows that the project is outside of the coastal barrier zone. This web, through HUD, the Wiser web training, it's available to you. You may need, if you're not familiar with the HUD exchange, you can go in and sign up. Anybody can go in and sign up for this, but you need an account with HUD. It's a great tool. There's multiple modules in the Wiser training that will take you through every step of the way, and they even break it down regulation by regulation. So like coastal barriers are broken down, fish and wildlife is broken down, endangered species, the whole thing will tell you exactly what you need for each of those items to demonstrate your consultation efforts. This is a big issue, and I can't stress enough. It's when we get the applications in, I don't want to get into the afternoon session with our gripes. But I understand CDBG's last in, and we get the applications, and the only piece of the puzzle I get is just the CDBG portion, and it's not enough. You can't give me that. I have to see the entire scope of the project. Because of that, you cannot make what we call choice limiting actions, which means you cannot go under construction. You can't be under contract for construction prior to having a receipt of award from our program and our office issuing the request for release of funds. Some groups may call it authorization to use grant funds. But you need those two pieces of the puzzle before you can actually go to contract for construction. If you are under contract, even if I'm just doing a piece of the puzzle, if you are under contract for construction prior to those occurring, I have to walk away. Your project is no longer eligible for funds. That has happened numerous times in the last couple of years, and those are not fun phone calls when I have to tell the supervisor that we're taking your money back. Our wonderful flow chart. It's if you can find your way through that, then we'll consider you for funding. But I realize that you got to have fun with this stuff because it can be confusing, but it is I think if you follow the flow chart, it's going to indicate to you where you are. I've got an unusual project right now that's actually public infrastructure that we're actually able to convert to exempt, which doesn't happen a lot, which means it's like a clear path to release of funds. There's no publication, there's no waiting. You just show me that the project can convert to exempt and we're good to go. But this is it's a good tool to have. And again, we can walk you through the steps if you're not sure exactly how to navigate through that process to find out where you're going to land. If you're thinking about applying for this year, these are the steps to consider moving ahead. One of the first things that you should do is at the local municipality level, designate the certifying officer. The certifying officer is taking responsibility for the environmental review record. This cannot be you, the engineers. This has to be a chief elected official or a member of the municipality. So it can be your plant operator. It can be the public works superintendent. It can be a member of the town board. Most cases, it's the chief elected official. If it's anyone other than the chief elected official that's being designated as the certifying officer, it requires that designation be done by resolution. So there's a lot of things to get ready for the CFA round for this year. This is just one more thing to think about. Get this out of the way because they will be signing all of the documents as you go through the application process. One of the things you want to do is that designation, the resolution, don't appoint the person by name, appoint them by title, because we get this every year. It's the supervisor is appointed by name or somebody else is appointed by name. The person leaves, we got a new person. Well, I can't accept the new signature is the certifying officer, because that prior specific person was identified as the certifying officer. That's why we say just do it by title, rather than by name. You've heard this from some of the other presenters earlier. Define the project, classify the project, go through the review, and then you're building your actual environmental review record and piling everything. So the environmental review record is the forms that we require, plus documentation of all your consultations. So every agency, every piece of puzzle that you've consulted on, we need all the documentation that's all part of it, and then you're going to prepare and submit the whole thing. We require, as part of the environmental review record, the preliminary engineering report or the final engineering report. That is part of what we look for with the NEPA. This has to come in with the application. So previously, this will be the third year now that we're requiring this. So I think 2021 was the last time we made awards, and your environmental came in after post-award. 22, 23, now 24. Everything has to come in. So you basically need to be prepared when you hit that submit button through the CFA. It's as if you were funded and you're ready to go. We need shovel-ready projects. So again, the design requirements, you need to be at the point that your project, we're getting segue here for a second, but your project, to think about this, is if you're ready, you go through the application, you submit it, you're awarded. We require you to be under contract for construction within 6 months of award. So for projects that were funded in November that received funding under our 23 round, they all have to be under contract for construction by this May. We have a short 2-year time frame for our contracts, and that's part of the reason why we need to require that. So again, exempt, there's 3 categories. There's exempt, categorically excluded A, and then B. So when you're preparing your application and putting your environmental together, you have, some of these may be covered, like engineering and design is an exempt cost, but your environmental review record is not exempt because we're getting into other activities. So you have to go to the level of the highest level of review based on the project. You've got the categorically excluded, not subject, and then you've got the Part B, you've got the Part A. And then you've got some of these just don't apply with respect to the infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure is going to fall under the categorically excluded subject 2A. Now, what you can do, and this is where this exempt project came in, it's the project was prepared, the environmental review was prepared, categorically excluded subject 2A, which meant they went through the entire mitigation. They were able to show, in this case, that they went through the consultation and there was no mitigation required. So, for example, SHPO signed off on the project. There was no requirement. SHPO gave them all clear. There was no DEC requirements. There's nothing impacting their speedies permit. That basically paved the way for this infrastructure project to come back to us, and we were able to convert that to exempt. Just again, some forms with the seeker form. If you're type 2, the only documentation I need is in the middle. You're just indicating to us that you've declared this a type 2 action. Otherwise, with the different type 1 or unlisted, we just need you to follow through. Type 1 requires the environmental need or notices bulletin. So again, just make sure that it's all included with the, how am I doing on time? I was run over. Okay. Yeah, so again, the biggest issue here is just that compliance determination. I can't stress enough. It's like, just give me more detail. Don't give me too much detail because then I have to go down a different rabbit hole. But just give me enough information in your consultation, in your mitigation efforts to show that you have cleared this. The 2 biggest stumbling blocks with this that I run into are SHPO and TIPO. If your project at this stage, you don't have a no impact statement from SHPO, and you don't have a no impact statement from TIPO, I can't move ahead with your project. If they're requiring additional archaeological studies, I've got a project right now in the southern tier with TIPO. They've come back and they're requiring somebody, the municipality has to hire a consultant to be on site daily during excavation because it's an extremely archaeologically sensitive area and it's just bring all kinds of delays and wrinkles into the project. Again, just talked about the SHPO TIPO, I'm ahead of myself. We've got the links here for you. Again, it's you have to get this stuff submitted. And again, the big issue with SHPO has come in where SHPO has been consulted. We didn't catch some of these last couple of years where there are requirements not to go to the archaeological studies, the 1.4A, and I've got one now that's again down the southern tier. That's I think it's the 1.4B larger study that the project is being held up by. This all has to be taken care of before you're ready to apply for us and complete this environmental record. Again, I've been at this for almost 30 years. I've never had a project that's required an environmental impact statement, but someday, maybe I will. Again, just go through this, do your checklist. So you're going to give me either the statutory checklist, and that's going to result in a notice of intent to request release of funds. Or if you have to go to the environmental assessment checklist, I don't get the statutory checklist. You're going to give me the EA checklist instead. And that by default, we know that you're going to go to a FONSI request for release of funds. In EIS, I've never had anything. I'm not sure New York will ever have something that's going to, a single project that's going to have more than 2,500 housing units in one project that we'll be involved in. But that's the only thing that I'm aware of that potentially could result in EIS. Timing, so your release of funds. These are date sensitive and I have no wiggle room on with HUD. If the days are off and you're going to have to republish. These are HUD requirements. So sometimes it can be a timing issue with your local newspaper. Some of the smaller communities only have weeklies. So you have to get that timing down correctly to make sure that you've got that timed correctly. And then we still have a 15-day comment period on our end from the date that we receive the release of funds. This is another thing that trips folks up. In the notice, it says on or about April 4th, 2024, the Village of Upstate will submit to OCR. I need that release of funds submitted to me on that day because that's the day that we actually physically receive it via email is the day that we start our 15-day comment period. Again, just the release of funds, it can't be signed or dated or submitted prior to the date that's stated in the notice. Don't move ahead. Don't presume that the release of funds, you can pick up the phone, you can call me and I can tell you, I know some of you I've talked with and it's like, yeah, everything's fine. But until we get you've got that letter from our office stating that the release of funds has been approved, don't presume that you do. Otherwise, because it can still have issues. Again, we'll issue the release of funds. Again, non-exempt costs, those are construction costs. With the preparation of this, I know that there's a cost for the environmental review. We can reimburse municipalities up to for the cost of preparing the NEPA. Those costs are eligible for reimbursement up to 12 months prior to the date of award. So if those costs have been incurred, track the costs, compile it, it's potentially eligible once you get the release of funds again. Part B to that is it is also subject to procurement. So if you've been hired, by Greg to come in and do your environmental, but the village did not include the CDBG or you did not procure for their services to complete the environmental, then it's not eligible for reimbursement under our guidelines. So just make sure that that procurement, when you're doing your RFQ for engineering, include the environmental services and that you're looking for reimbursement for that. If you're awarded, we can still come back and help you out with that cost. Questions? Yep.
So this is from Trevor. Can OCR accept projects that have a SHPO release of funding letter?
Well, I'm not sure where SHPO release of funds letter is.
This is Liz at EFC. I'll just clarify because we see this a lot at our funding programs, that it will be a letter that says, I'm paraphrasing, but SHPO will not have really done a deep dive yet, and they'll just say, we're giving contingent approval. We don't have any problem with the project moving forward with, say, like short-term funding or grant funding,
Okay.
basically to acknowledge that they're looking at it, but they don't want to hold up funding in any way. So they provide this letter
Right,
in the
yeah.
meantime.
All right, so in an instance like that, yes, we could accept that. I've actually had one of those come in through our office. But again, that's at your risk, because if there is an issue with SHPO, then you're gonna have to stop then until if SHPO comes back with a mitigation requirement, then you're gonna have to demonstrate to us that that's been resolved. The other thing that has occurred, and I actually had this happen to me once several years ago, is with TIPO. Chief elected official has to, or the certifying officer has to do the outreach to TIPO, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. There's a 30-day comment period for that. HUD allows TIPO to come back later, so we can be 6 months into construction, and TIPO still has the right to respond at that point and say, hey, we got an issue here and we might need to stop things. I did have that happen one time several years ago. We were doing a project around Oneida Lake, but these are just their factors. These are issues that at your risk while you're going through the process. All right, thanks.
All right, here's Charlie's website. Continued. We will provide all these slides to you. All right, now I'm looking John Helgren up. You're just using the down arrow in that slide.
Down here. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh, boy. I see two down arrows. That says Mike main. So don't use what this is like. Hi, everybody. I'm John Helgren, USDA Rural Development. Let's see. Oh, we went to, that's good. Okay, I got names. I thought I had names up here initially. So, first, thanks to the Center for Excellence, Environment and Excellence, right? Thank you, Excellence. I got to get my names right. It's hard to get into this EFC confusion and stuff. So anyways, yes, thank you for hosting this, having us, and thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And the folks online as well. So I'm John Helgren, USDA, as I said, but I wanted to cover a few things on environmental reviews that we have to do. And it really ties in well with what Charlie had to say. And at the end, I'll introduce, we have another environmental person that covers our state as well, Tom Lacka, who couldn't be here. So I'll mention his name as well. And but you can shoot questions by either one of us. So what did we say here? So basically, as a federal agency, we're committing federal dollars. And because of that, we have to follow NEPA. So you've heard the terms NEPA and Seeker here with other agencies as well. So we need to follow the NEPA guidance, but there's actually a little bit more with that. So it's beyond NEPA. Realistically, when you're looking at doing an environmental review that covers federal requirements. So but as Charlie pointed out, and just so you know, we have categories as well. They kind of fit the same names in terms of categorical exclusion with the report, without a report, environmental assessment, EIS. Most of the projects that we get coming in as municipal type projects, at least 95% fit in this, what's called a categorical exclusion with the report for us. And this is under our 1970 regulations, which essentially is a vehicle for us to complete and do NEPA. So I'll just say that rarely do we do an environmental assessment, but it can, and I'll talk a little bit about the two. So the typical thing we work with you folks that I see some common faces and names here is that you're going to provide an environmental report for us, and that's going to cover specific things that are identified in our regulations, but I think some of you are familiar with. But I kind of started down a list of some of the biggies, and so Historical preservation review, section 106 is like one of our number one things. And as Charlie pointed out, it can be a stumbling block, and I'll try to point out some things there too as well. Endangered Species Act, section 7, we have to cover that. And so, and that can be a little problematic. And time consuming a little bit, but just in the last year, it's gotten better. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Wetlands, floodplains. We do have other things and other resources that need to be addressed, that you're familiar with. Documenting, as Chuck said, it's not in a coastal zone, and some of these we just need maps. It's not in a coastal zone. It's not in a sole source aquifer. It's not in the ADK. Things like that are straightforward. And we have some specific language that we need set in there. Well, we would tell you that if you don't provide it. I'll try to highlight a couple of those. One of the newer things that came up recently was floodplain. So just in the since I think January, let's say early January. So it's January this year. We actually are now required to evaluate projects with this FFRMS, the standard. And what that means is actually, so if you go to the FEMA site, do a floodplain map, you spit that, we want to see that and see where the project is. But actually then there's an additional review upon that. There's 3 different types or classes of review. And I think our projects typically fall within the second one, where you're actually reevaluating the floodplain level, the 100-year floodplain, or elevation, based on climate change and potential climate change. So that has come up. And so we're going to ask you folks to do it, because you're better at doing it than us. We could actually do it ourselves, and we can, but it's going to be quicker if you do it. So I think, as you might see, and I've only gone through the process a couple times myself. It's not that hard, but there's some steps you do, but we might be asking you, hey, give us the FFRMS review and let's see where we're at. It gives you potentially a higher floodplain elevation. So some of the big issues, that's what we're trying to highlight here. Some of the things we see with environmental reviews that have problems is maps, showing the same maps throughout the project. I get several projects, we get an environmental report that says, here's our project, and here's our scope, here's where we're doing stuff. You get the PER, and it says it can be close. Sometimes it can be very different. That's rare, but a lot of times it's like, oh, we're going down this street and this road, we're doing this in this place. They don't match. They need to match. So whoever's doing you're working with on your engineering report, if you're in the same office, try to talk to each other and get the same scope down. If you're different people, try to talk to them and get the same scope, because we're going to ask you, what's the scope? Is it in the environmental one? Is it in the PER? And they got to match. So we're talking about the same thing. So historic preservation. So for us, we the first step and the easiest step, straightforward step, is go through the CRIS system. If you haven't done that, you're shot. You got to go in, and to me it's a pretty easy thing. We work well with SHPO, and they include us in on the notices that they send. So first you go in, tell them the project, what's going on, the scope. They're going to ask you for something, but identify it, please, as a rule development project, so that they'll talk to us if they need to, or at least keep us in the email loop. If you don't, that's okay. We'll get it later on from you in the report, but it would be very helpful if you would identify specifically USDA rule development. They know that. They have a little box for that in the CRIS system. So you've done that. You're going to get a letter, as Charlie said, that hopefully says there's no impact. They might say you need an archaeological survey. So we can talk about that there then. You can go, we were more in the boat of what Charlie was, and maybe some other agencies, but to be able to fund your project, you would have to go through the archaeological survey. At this point, since 2018, I think, if I get my dates right, we actually have a national programmatic agreement that with the ACHP. I'm trying to remember all the acronyms, but anyways, the SHPO gurus at the national level. But basically, it says, hey, this project needs archaeological review, but we can fund the project and delay our determination for section 106 until construction, until we're ready to go to construction. So we could actually fund the project under this NPA and let you go forward. Some of your other agencies may not let you, and if that's so fine. But so it used to be that if you got a letter from SHPO that says, we're okay with the financing, go ahead with the project, that didn't fly with us. It's not going to happen because we couldn't do it legally. Now we actually can delay that and use this process. So we're going to send out memos to do that and document that. But I will say we don't want that as a crutch for the project necessarily, that you haven't gone through the actual process of notifying SHPO and or particularly the tribes. So don't just say, well, I didn't get a hold of tribes, let's just do NPA. If now that you hear that, that's not going to happen. We got to go through the process of identifying the project and letting the tribes know. So the other tricky thing that's come up for us in the last couple of years is notifying the tribes. So we actually want you, on behalf of the applicant, to notify the tribes. It's not as detailed as or specific as Charlie says in terms of who contacts the tribes. It could be you folks as consultants who are, or the municipality. But two things. We have a canned letter, one letter to let them know about the project. We want you to send that out. Use the specific template that we have. We need that specific template, and it's in our environmental guide, which is online, and I can send it to you. Whoops, sorry. When we get there, if you need it, and then that just lets them know about the project. Then you've got to do the second letter that says, here's our project, and this is what we want to do, and this is what SHPO says. If you've gone far enough in the project and you already got a hold of SHPO, you can just do the second letter. You can skip the first one. That's okay. But I just want you to know, typically we need 2 letters, but that second letter is the key one, because that's what kicks in the 30-day period, the clock. So look for that and ask us if you're not certain, is this the right letter that my municipality needs to send out, or I need to on their behalf? Check with us and we'll confirm that with you. But that's what notifies the tribes and gives them a 30-day clock. That specific letter, and it has to be that letter in that language, because we've been hammered by our national office that we didn't use that, or if we don't use it, we can't accept it. We got to start over again. So just be aware that's a really important factor, that letter and what it says. 2, then, who you send it to. Unfortunately, I think we are required to use the HUD TDAT list for contact. So you go to that site, you see who the tribes are on there, and you contact those tribes. That doesn't always match with what SHPO says. SHPO has a much better list. SHPO knows what they're doing, in my opinion, in terms of who to contact for tribes. But so they don't always match. Just be aware of that, but that doesn't matter. Use the HUD list. But we would say there is a couple tribes in our guide that we identify that unfortunately need to be notified, specific personnel, but aren't on the TDAT list. So what might happen is we might say, let's get that out to them, if we're aware of it. So I'd say, if you're going to send number 2 letter from us to notify the tribes and want to kick the 30-day clock in, you're welcome to copy us so that we'll look at the letter and just make sure, hey, it's the right one and you're sending it to the right people. That can help out a lot, I think, time-wise. So the second kind of tricky point can be the endangered species review. I think it's actually gotten a little bit better, but there's some specifics. But you always got to go to the IPAC site if you're aware of that. If you're not, get in there and get an account and get going. But that's what you need. You got to get your listing from the IPAC site, and then for any species that is listed, you need to do the D key. That started last April. We used to have some other avenues, and we used to actually have to write ourselves. You would tell us, here's my species, whatever they are. I would have to send a letter to Fish and Wildlife and say, here's what we think is going to happen. We don't think it's a no effect or may affect, but not adversely. Do you agree? Fish and Wildlife, they would send us a letter back. That takes time. Now we can use the D key. If you use the D key, you can get in there and run it and come up with a determination that's recommended from them or that they agree to, and then we can agree to that. Because officially we have to make the determination for Section 106, the historic preservation, and for the Section 7 review. So if you have some questions on what's happening with IPAC and the review, check in with us. Because sometimes you'll go through the D key we found and you can't get the you're going to get a May effect maybe, and you can't figure out how not to. Talk to us. Let's see what we can do. Either we can do it ourselves or we'll figure it out, or maybe that's what it is. And then we do have to write a letter to them. So let's go from there. But that can be a couple tricky spots. As I said, that we're doing the determinations. We have officially, as a federal agency, we have to say these things. So what SHPO says is a recommendation to us, just so you're aware, or what Fish and Wildlife says through their D-key is a recommendation to us. We actually have to do that and say it's a no effect or, not adversely affect, whatever it is. We do that with some internal documentation. And so just be aware of that we will do that. If you need copies of that to share with other agencies, which we've had, that we can do once we're ready to fund the project. But, and if there are specific mitigation measures in a project, but you need to do something, and most typically it's going to be with historic preservation. So SHPO is going to say you can do this, but you got to go on the other side of the road. If you're going to do a new water main, or you can't go here, go around it or something like that. It's rare, but it happens. We're going to write that specifically into our letter that commits money to the municipality you're working with. Same thing, or with Fish and Wildlife. A classic thing is doing the, winter cutting of trees, that we're potentially going to write that in there as a mitigation measure if we need to, just so be aware of that. So I said a couple of this, making sure so issues that we see between these technical documents that we get, the environmental report, the PER scope, that they match. Alternatives too. A lot of times we'll get several alternatives in a PER and they'll say, this is the one we're going to do, which is what we want in the engineering report. But the environmental report says nothing. It just gives a bunch of alternatives and it doesn't decide what it is. So go back to your people who are doing it and make sure that they match up, and this was the alternative we picked, so we want that to be reviewed for the environmental. Now, if you want to leave the options open, then you're going to need to make sure the environmental report covers, you want to do some extra roads down there or something like that. It's going to have to cover all of that. I'm trying to think what else I got in here. You can see that incorrect. I've said some of this already. I said maps. Those are important for some of these federal areas. The second to last bullet, looking at, we need specific statements anymore that say, one, you're not for air quality, you're in a non-attainment, you're in an attainment area for air quality. If you go to the Green Book, there's only one county in New York that's not, that we deal with. It's downstate stuff, yes, maybe Albany, but for rural communities that we are able to work with, only Chautauqua County is listed. So if you got a project in Chautauqua County, you've got to talk. But if it's not, you can just say it's not in the Green Book, you're done. Just say, and transportation, you got to identify, is there any transportation issues with it? And and noise. So we get audited regularly by ourselves. So things of our own audits from our own people come out in these things, and we're like, really? We got to ask them, make sure they have a list. And that's why some of the stuff that you see comes out of it, including having very specific letters to contact tribes. So lastly, but just one thing to stress, seeker is not, NEPA is not what we need. We want to know that you've done seeker or are in the seeker process. We actually, to fund a project, we don't need to know that seeker is completed. That can go on for us. NEPA and its processes have to be done and the determinations made for us to be able to fund a project. So one of the issues we'll see is we'll get an application, and we do everything online. So you submit the engineering report, upload a PDF. That's great. You upload an environmental report. Sometimes the environmental report we get is the seeker long form. That's not going to fly. It doesn't help us. If that's all the farthest you are, then you got to let us know. We're going to need an environmental report at some point. So we want more than that to review. Now, what we could deal with is if you've got an environmental report where you've been able to pull together all, say, here's the impact and all the resources, but maybe you don't have the letter back from Chris SHPO, or maybe you didn't work out the D-key stuff, something like that. That's okay. We can work that out and identify that in the review, but don't just give us a seeker, please, because we're just going to throw that back to you and say, this isn't going to fly. We need a real environmental report and review that meets NEPA requirements. Let's see. Justice, and these things are just, you can look at this, I would say, I mentioned the floodplain, a couple other, newer things for us is, we used to make you do intergovernmental review, at least from our perspective. And that meant that we had a list, you went to planning agencies. It's a simple process, but it kind of was a pain in the hook, if you ask me, that you went to either a regional planning board or a county planning board, if they weren't part of the regional system, get a letter from them that says, hey, this project's great, or okay, we don't have any problem with it. We actually don't have to do that anymore. We just learned. So that's a simple thing at the end, but there is no intergovernmental review for us anymore that we have to do. Some states actually have a one-stop shop. If you're familiar, if you work with other states that have a single process to go through, like an environmental review, you do everything in one spot and it goes through. They don't have that in New York necessarily that meets NEPA. So, but they had this intergovernmental review. So just that's new. And I think that was, yep, those are the main highlights. So if you definitely have any questions, call Tom or myself. Don't hesitate to email, call us. We'll talk you through anything that we need so you're clearing it. Any questions? Yes, Casey.
Is it acceptable well, let me start over. So you write your PER, you establish what the capital project is, and then you go to your environmental report.
Okay.
Is it acceptable to just reference your PER in the environmental report instead of rewriting your alternatives that were considered and what project was selected to move forward?
Oh, yeah.
So you can attach your
No.
PER by reference
You
or
have to just reference for us, because say, here's the PR we said separately, but make sure you got
a summary or something?
Well, yes, the best thing would say, here's our project. Yeah, make it really brief summary. We looked at alternatives. Here's what we came up with. But the biggest thing is like maps. Like if I don't have a floodplain map in the environmental report that shows where I'm going, with the project, that isn't going to help. We're going to ask you, give me the floodplain map.
Sure.
So that part of it, I'd say, I think, and the converse is true. We don't need the whole environmental report in the PER. Definitely. That's way too much, so, but yes, we don't need everything that was done in the PR and the ER. That would be overkill and not necessary. Just summarize it. If we need a little more clarification, we'll ask you. But I think you can certainly say, PR said this, we're going to do this project. Here it is. Here's the scope.
Yeah.
New
Okay.
tank, new water mains, whatever you want to do, or new treatment plant, something. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks,
That good?
John.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think we're good. We're gonna move on to you, Liz. Yeah. Oh. Oh. Okay. Thanks, Avery. All right, one more for you, John. Can we create one environmental review record that will satisfy both OCR, CDBG, and USDA RD requirements if funding is sought from both agencies?
Charlie will answer that for you. One report.
We can accept one environmental review record. RD has slightly more stringent standards, I think, under.
It
Part
depends on
50, I
what it
think.
is. And so,
Right.
yes, I would say, I would agree with Charlie that if, usually what happens is they've either done something for us or done something for Charlie. And if they have, or OCR, if they have, we can take that and then digest that and say, okay, we need this, we might need some additional information, but we can definitely take it.
Is this on?
We don't require
right.
it, but you can. So if they did that, that's great.
Right, so, but if you don't require the certifying officer to do TIPO, and we do, then TIPO would have to be redone for our
Correct, which wouldn't
purposes.
Be good. They're better off doing it the way you need.
Right.
They're gonna do your project.
And the distinction between both of us is, well, we can accept the record and build it. You still have a separate release of funds process that you go through. You still have to go through the release of funds
Right.
process for us.
And so like someone did a report for OCR, or even if it ends up some other agency, we can't just take their report flat out and say, we're done. We have to do some internal processes and we might need to ask for more info, but certainly I think the same report could work for both for the most of it.
Right, we'll still do the same thing. We'll still look at the record. It'll still be reviewed. It's not just a rubber stamp.
Right.
Yep.
Hopefully that answers the question. See if they're happy with it.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
No
good.
kickback.
Good question. It is, because I'd rather have one that works for everybody, and we'll see. It's like the PER, the engineering report. I think something meets them. It's gonna, for the most part, meet what we need, and we'll add to it when we need to or ask for that. So, okay.
Great. Thanks so much, John.
All right, I'll try to go through this quickly because I know it's right before lunch. So we're hopping back over to the state revolving funds. This is going to be applicable for clean water and drinking water projects. It's all together. We're kind of a unique program with the SRF programs. We obviously get money from the federal government, from EPA, but we also have state funds that come into their program as well, and we recycle funds. So I'll start off by saying we're a little bit of a hybrid program, depending on whether you're getting the traditional financing from us through what EPA gives us every year as a capitalization grant to fund these projects. And it may differ if you are getting state grant funds through our WEA program. So I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize where different program requirements come into play. But whatever project we fund, we will need an environmental review. We don't require a full environmental report like RD does, but we expect the PER that you develop does include some information on your environmental impacts. And of course, we're going to require the environmental review through the seeker or NEPA process, depending on what kind of funding that you have. And the environmental review is a requirement of our application process. So if you've listed your project on the annual list on our intended use plan and you're ready to submit a financing application, the completed environmental review will be one of the requirements that you'll submit, the full documentation that it's been completed. And also for our grant applications for the WEA and IMG programs, it's a requirement as well. So like I mentioned, we're a little bit hybrid, and it was interesting as a staff engineer at EFC who was so familiar with the seeker process from my consultant days. So switching over to EFC to kind of understand that it was a little bit of both was new to me. So depending on what funding you have from us, you'll either follow the state process. Maybe you're going to have something that's a little bit combined for both of them, or you'll be fully doing the NEPA review and would likely overlap with what you may be already doing for your RD application. So the EPA requires the SRF programs to follow the state environmental review process. Not to throw another acronym out at you, but at EFC, we'll talk a lot about the SERP process. And because New York environmental review is pretty rigorous on its own, EPA had said, all right, for most of the projects that you fund through the SRF program, we're going to say the seeker process is NEPA-like. So that means some, but not all, the federal requirements are going to apply. And this really is triggered for all of the, for most of the SRF projects that we fund, if you don't have any like special additional federal funding, like the bipartisan infrastructure law, for example. So the key question that you want to ask yourself is, what is the project scope and how is it being funded? And if you're not really sure after this presentation what gets triggered when, I would just reach out to your EFC contact or DOH contact, and we'll specifically tell you like, all right, this is what you want to focus on. And I will say I'm an engineer, I'm not a legal attorney. We have a whole legal department at EFC. So if it's a question that your engineer can't answer, we'll probably just refer you to the legal attorney that's assigned to the project, and they can give you more information than I ever could in this presentation. So to start off, projects that 9 times out of 10, most of the people that come in for us want the SRF financing for their project. That means they need to comply with this NEPA-like process. So this would apply to all drinking water SRF projects. And just to throw a term at you, for clean water projects, this applies to treatment work projects. So that's going to be pretty much all your wastewater infrastructure, what the Clean Water Act defines as treatment work. So if you're familiar with our terms and conditions packet, oftentimes we have check boxes of like treatment works or non-treatment works. That's what we're referring to. What we're trying to get at is what requirements may come into play. So this means that if you aren't otherwise a type 2 under the state environmental review process, if you want SRF financing, we're going to require you to treat your project like a type 1 with a full coordinated review. So for an example, if you weren't using SRF funding, it's just a municipal project that you're doing, You're going to do your seeker action. Maybe you determine it's an unlisted action. For the state process, you could say, all right, I'm going to do a short EAF. I'm not going to do the coordinated review because I don't really think it's necessary for the scope of my project. If you want SRF financing, you have to do the whole kit and caboodle. You have to do a full EAF. You can still note that you're an unlisted, but you have to choose to do the full EAF, and you have to do the coordinated review with all your involved agencies. Oftentimes when people are applying for a WEA grant, they'll just give us their short EAF, but they've indicated they're going to fund the balance of the project with an SRF loan. We're going to say your application's incomplete and we won't be able to fund you a grant. So just be very aware of, if you want to use SRF financing, be prepared to do both of those if you're a type 1 or unlisted action. Well, for type 1, you're going to have to do that anyways, but if you're unlisted, you got to treat it like a type 1. Okay, so if the project is a type 2, what we're looking for is a certified copy of a resolution, and you want to make sure that it clearly explains that you are declaring it a type 2 and the specific exemption of why it was determined to be a type 2. And I think we've also, I don't think there's anything by law that requires the resolution, but that's what our legal department would prefer to see. But we can also accept, I think, a memo from the consulting firm that's using their judgment to state that it's the project scope, that it's a type 2, and specifically the reasons why, like repair, rehabilitation in kind, the project's doing improvements less than 4,000 square feet, those type 2 citations, that is in state law. So if the second bullet here is if you are a type 1 or unlisted action, these are all the documents that our legal department is going to want to make sure that we have on file. And we would expect that we will need to have before we close a financing on your project. So we're going to want the full environmental assessment form, parts 1 through 3. You're going to have all your certified resolutions declaring lead agency status and the final negative declaration. For most projects, that's what we see. All of the lead agency solicitation notices and any responses that you get. And then finally, the proof of environmental notice bulletin. So once the seeker process is concluded, we will want to see that it's been published on DEC's website. And we often, for the WEA program, as long as we're able to confirm that seeker's been completed and we don't have any questions on your timeline, for example, for your coordinated review, normally we want to see that 30-day review period unless you have all your responses back from your agencies. I think as long if we can confirm that things have been done right, we can award you a grant, but these are all the documents that we're going to need for the file before we close. And what often we see as the delay to closing a loan, because EFC can't, or DOH can't even approve an engineering report until the seeker has been received in full and we get sign off from, for example, for clean water projects, we need sign off from DEC on every environmental reviews. So if you have all of this in your file, give it to us. It will prevent delays in the future. We want to make sure you get, your money if you want to move your project forward. So for state grant projects, so the key here is you're not receiving any federal funding, financing from us. You're only going to be awarded, if you're awarded a WEA grant and you're going to fund the balance of the project yourself. Projects do not need to comply with this NEPA-like review, only the state review. So if you want to give us a short EAF, if you don't want to do a coordinated review for your unlisted action, that's fine. We won't penalize your application. You can move forward with that process as usual. And in addition to our WEA and IMG awardees, this is also true for any projects that for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program that are considered non-point source projects. So our projects, for example, that do stormwater infrastructure for the Green Innovation Grant Program, GIGP, they do not have to comply with the full NEPA review. It would just be, they can do a short EAF if they choose to. And I think, all right, yeah. So this is just kind of summarizing that if it's a grant-only project, what we internally call grant-only project, if it's an unlisted action, we can accept the short EAF. We'll still need a copy of the negative declaration, and the coordinated review is optional. All right, so we've in the past couple years have been trying to delve into the full NEPA review process for federal grant projects, or with the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we have. Not all projects that we fund have this grant funding. It'll be available for 5 years. We're about 2 years in. So we throw around the term equivalency, which our program has always had equivalency projects. Typically, we have used New York City as kind of where we do all of our documentation to EPA, but EPA says we have to use a portion of our funding has to follow the full NEPA requirements. And those are identified in the intended use plan. So right now, that means that additional federal environmental crosscutters apply in addition to what we have already talked about for the seeker and the SERP process. So depending on what program you're looking at, clean water equivalency projects, we have a population threshold. So if you were identified as receiving bill federal grant funds on our intended use plan, but your population size is less than 10,000 people, we've said, okay, you're not equivalency. This is a hardship for you to do additional federal environmental review requirements. So we'll give you your bill money, but you don't have to do all these additional environmental review requirements. But if your population is over that, your project will be identified in the IUP with an E in the notes column. And so it's something that we would be checking before we close your financing with us, that you've done these additional reviews, which I have on the next slide, we'll have a checklist slide that kind of walks through what we're checking. On the drinking water projects, equivalency projects are referred to as tier 1 projects. And I know that in the room that's kind of cut off a little bit, but you know, it says projects participating in the DWSOF equivalency incentive program and projects funded with Bill EC, and which is emerging contaminants, and Bill LSL, which is lead service line. No, that's right. Lead service line. Okay. I don't know why I thought I was missing a letter. So right now, I think for the drinking water program, a lot of the equivalency monies is being directed to some of these specific, like the specific bill programs for emerging contaminants and lead service line. But Will is available to talk to anybody about the drinking water program later if they have questions. So for the clean water program, just so everyone's aware, this is just a screenshot of the intended use plan. So if you were looking at your project and you know you got bill funding, you want to know, like, well, how do I know if I'm this mysterious equivalency or not? This just shows all the way to the second column to the right. If you have an E there, that just identifies to you that there may be additional requirements that you have to comply with. And if you were one of the lucky projects to be awarded bill funding or being eligible for bill funding on our intended use plan, you'll have received a letter from us that does identify if you're equivalency or not. And you'll receive this checklist. It's meant to supplement the state environmental review process that you've already done, and just identify to us that you've done the additional federal agency reviews that would need to take it from this NEPA-like review that we were talking to the full NEPA review. So the top part, you know, identifies, you know, maybe you're a type 2 and you don't have to complete the rest of the form. Type 2 kind of translates to the same as the NEPA categorical exclusion for most of the projects that we do. So really additional environmental review doesn't have to happen. The bottom section is really for the type 1s and unlisted that, you know, we're going to ask for a little bit more information and have you fill out our environmental review checklist. So this walks through all the federal environmental crosscutters that we have. And we've tried to make this easy, although it may not look like it, that we've identified the state seeker environmental assessment form sections where you're already providing us information, and we're asking the consultant and the community to affirm that you've done the review with any of these additional actions that might be required. And if you need to attach additional documentation that, I don't know, maybe you have to check with some other federal agencies that are kind of above and beyond what is already on the EAF, we're going to want documentation submitted to us that it was completed. And this is my last slide. And this just shows some of the sample letters that we get back. I threw in the SHPO letter here. I realized that after listening to the other presentations, I was silent on the fact that EFC does require SHPO correspondence as well, just like all the other agencies. We can accept this conditional approval letter that we've kind of been talking about of just showing that you've engaged with SHPO. We can't accept like a CRIS notification. Like if you've submitted to CRIS and you just got the automatic email back that says, thank you, we received it, we'll look at it. We can't take that. We have to have some formal letter back from SHPO. But if you are equivalency and you're asked to do this full federal review, I highlighted that section 106 that John had kind of alluded to in his presentation. Depending on what your funding is from us, our legal department may be asking these letters to be modified to say section 106 to make sure the full federal review had been done at the SHPO level. So that's something that can be cleaned up before we close a loan. It wouldn't impact your ability to be awarded a state grant, for example, or to start the process with us.
Thank you. I have a question for you from online. This is from Laura. Can you elaborate on the consulting firm memo regarding type 2 classification?
Sure. So if your project is a type 2, our office just needs to have it could be a memo from the consulting firm or a resolution from the municipality, but it just has to have the same level of information that you are saying what the scope of your project is, you are officially stating that it's a type 2 action, and it needs to include the specific DEC citations for why you're classifying it as a type 2. So basically they're going to be the same thing, just one might be a formal resolution passed by the municipal board, and some we've accepted them in the past where they've come from the consulting firm. You know, they're using their knowledge and judgment to make that determination for the community, and we can accept either.
Any questions in the room? Thanks so much, Liz. All right, I have so much good news for you guys. First off, lunch has been set up in the room next door, and I want to give a huge thank you to USDA Rural Development. It's with their grant funding that we were able to pay for this event and host all of you and enjoy lunch. And secondly, because we like to have a lot of fun here, I hope you guys all submitted your Orbeez guess. I believe the winner will be announced at lunch. And we have also designed a trivia game with prizes that we can play during lunch. There's 3 categories. And so that will be going on too. So if you want to play trivia, you grab some food and come back in here. It's not a requirement, don't worry. And thank you so much. Oh, and our online attendees should come back at 12:45. I didn't know if we wanted to put up our I will put the right back.
Okay, so I can start and just go through the list for DOH, which I'll pretty much just go through this list. So the first one is to understand that the SRF program and WEA are two separate funding programs and have different requirements. They also have different application procedures, so you just have to understand the differences and go through that. Next bullet is just to consult with DOH and EFC if you have any questions about requirements for either program. Like right now, the WEA program is open. There's a water grants email box that goes to EFC and DOH employees, and sending emails to that with any questions could help you move along with making sure the application is going smoothly and such. The next one is to attend the webinar, which the webinar for the WEA program happened. So, or watch the webinar recording by EFC about the WEA program so you can understand all requirements, which EFC's website should have that webinar available to be viewed. For the WEA program, you should try to get the application in early if possible ahead of the deadline. This would give us a chance to potentially review the application for completeness and reach out to you if we notice anything is missing, which that will be, it's largely dependent on the amount of applications we have. And if it's in early, you have a better chance of that because we do receive somewhere near 300 applications usually, which it's hard to reach out to every community if they're missing items or certain things like that. For WEA, you should clearly indicate whether or not the non-WEA portion of the project will be funded with SRF funding. Yeah, this would determine other requirements for the process because like SRF has different program requirements, whereas if you decided to only pursue the grant, there would be lesser requirements because it's state money and not the federal money. WEA and IMG grants are not considered for SRF financing unless marked so on the WEA application. So in the WEA application process in the portal, there should be a space to mark whether you want SRF funding or not. Another thing is to just make sure you understand the seeker requirements and do the correct review for the project. Because especially with the WEA program, the seeker has to generally be moving forward and generally close to completion at the time of application. So we would need to see that. And I believe Liz mentioned this previously, that any project funded with SRF must undergo a seeker type 1 unless it is a type 2. So if it is something that you would normally consider an unlisted action, you would have to go through the full type 1 process. And then next bullet is just for WEA applications, seeker must be completed correctly and documents submitted with the application, and not doing so could negatively impact your application's acceptability, which EFC legal generally reviews the seeker for WEA applications. And if there's no seeker, the application would generally just be viewed as unacceptable and wouldn't move forward along through the process. And then just mentioning here more seeker stuff, which is a type 2 seeker resolution, or as Liz talked about earlier, or like a memo, must cite the specific subparagraph of the seeker statute for classified type 2 actions. Next bullet is something we've mentioned already, I think, which is just make sure engineering reports are up to date and the project scope and cost in the report match those presented in the application. And that's just something to make sure that the scope and everything matches before, like between all documents that you submit, between the application, the engineering report, the seeker documents. Make sure the report is stamped by a New York State licensed PE. And if you've executed any agreements like engineering agreements or construction contracts or things prior to applying for funding, you should make sure that all these agreements include the EFC terms and conditions. Like if you've already received something like DOH approval to go out to bid and start construction, that to be reimbursed through the program, you would need to meet all the requirements of the program and have the terms and conditions in there. And then if you plan on applying for WEA and SRF, submit project listening form and engineering report to DOH early. This again will just give us more time to review the application and score the project appropriately. Here we don't have too many, like this is do's and don'ts. We don't have any don'ts listed, but I would say the don'ts are the opposite of the do's.
Okay, thanks, Will. This is Liz at EFC, and funny enough, although I shouldn't be surprised by this, I was listening to everything that Will was saying, looking at my list. I'm like, oh, I pretty much wrote the exact same thing. So, obviously, there's a lot of overlap between EFC's list and I think. Oh, all right. So I'm just gonna kind of supplement some of the things that Will said because I think. Yeah. Tests. Maybe I'm just holding it wrong. Okay. So to supplement what he was saying, so with the terms and conditions and executed contracts, some projects we made ineligible last year because you had indicated on the WEA application that you had started construction, but we didn't receive plans and specs to confirm that you included the terms, EFC's terms and conditions. So we are trying to catch that earlier. So my recommendation to expand on this bullet is that if you're telling us in your application that you started construction, you know, that's a sign of project readiness. We like to see that, but please make sure that the plans and specifications are uploaded with your application. We've updated the portal to prompt that from applicants better this year, but make sure the EFC terms and conditions is in your specifications. If it's not, we'll make you ineligible. There won't be time to correct it. If you haven't started bidding your project, you know, we'll provide feedback, obviously, that you need to include it before bidding, but just keep that in mind. We don't want to kick you out right at the get-go. It's really important that when you're applying for a WEA or an IMG grant, if you want SRF financing, to indicate that in the application, like Will said. I think some communities or consultants are confused. If they've already listed on the intended use plan, I think in their minds, they've already notified us they want SRF, so they'll indicate. I don't think it's you. And I don't know why. Okay, so just make sure that you are definitely doing that so that we can make sure we're processing it right. The list, if you are interested in SRF financing, just keep in mind that the listing deadline currently on the before. Deadline to apply for the WEA program and IMG and to list new projects for the intended use plan if you want financing. And another reason why you'd want to double check that your budget is current within 6 months is you don't want to shortchange yourself. So it's one chance to get as large of a WEA grant as you want. So we don't want you to pad the budget for no reason, but we also want the budgets to be current and accurate so that, you know, if you had a budget that was done 3 years ago and it really should have been increased, you're basically shortchanging yourself of a larger WEA grant. So this is your one time to do it. We do not give WEA grants for cost increases in a different year. You can't get another bite at the apple. So just make sure your budget has as much money as you need to justify your project. And obviously reach out to us if you have questions. I just throw that on there because, you know, we have staff in all of our divisions that are available to ask questions, and we're willing to debrief you on past applications. We're willing to give you suggestions of how to make your application more competitive, but you have to ask the question to us. We're busy enough that we're not going to find you. You need to find us if you want to ask about a prior application that didn't get awarded. see. Yeah, so there's a lot on the WEA and the IMG scoring system that is overlapped with the SRF program that's really documentation driven. But demonstrating project readiness is one that really can be expanded upon by a municipality or a consultant in the application. It might set the project apart from other applicants. So anything you can do in the report or in the application to highlight what you've done to move the project forward and how it will move forward quickly is something that a lot of municipalities don't take the time to highlight, and they don't get any points in the category. So that can be if you've executed engineering agreements, you can just submit those to us. If you've maybe done 50%, 30% plans and specs, and they're just in development, you started that design, just send them to us. We won't review them from a technical perspective, but it can at least show that, like, yeah, we're moving forward, we're making progress, and might set you apart from another applicant and things like that. So I would just submit whatever you want for supplemental documents and we'll look at it. And we see a lot of applicants that are applying for IMG that don't indicate that they want WEA 2. That might be because the plan of finance, at least on the clean water side, a 40% grant is better than a 25% grant, and maybe they don't want to do a 75% local share. That's one thing, but don't shortchange yourself if WEA would also work for you with your plan of finance. And I mention that because the IMG program is much more competitive than WEA. We don't award as many projects. So a project may have scored well for the WEA program and gotten a grant, but you didn't tell us you wanted that. And we don't make that, we don't put you on the WEA list if you didn't apply for it. So I'd probably say check both boxes if you want to, if you are a IMG project, which those are like shared infrastructure between multiple municipalities. If you have a joint project, just check your WEA box too. And that way you get thrown in both programs to be competitive, and you don't limit your the grants that you're eligible for. All right, I'm going to pass it on. Thank you.
We'll see how it works. All right, so I'm Kim. I'm from USDA Rural Development. I'm going to go over our list, and some of our do's and don'ts are on here. So I'm just going to hit them both at the same time. So for the first one, when you submit usage and connections, we want them for residential and commercial, and we want them broken out in the PER. And we also want them broken out in our application, which is in RD Apply. What we don't want is for you to state what the EDUs are. We calculate EDUs for our own underwriting. And then when you submit O&M expenses, we want those broken down by cost purchase of water. For example, $3.50 per 1,000 gallons, include any utilities, cost for employees. What we don't want is you to submit a flat fee for O&M. We cannot accept a cost per EDU for O&M. And then we want the project cost to be rounded to the nearest 1,000. Our underwriting system needs the loan and grant amounts to the exact 1,000. And then when you are ready to apply and you're in RD Apply, that system is live. So as soon as you start doing an application in there, we can see that application and as you're working through it. So if you have any questions, you can call us up and we can jump right to that page you're working on, and we can do that right there with you. So call us anytime. And then when you're submitting an authorized representative role for the mayor or supervisor, that needs to be the rep sign certify role. They're the only ones that can submit the application. And you can't have an authorized representative role assigned more than one role to multiple people. So there's only one role per person. And then ensure if authorized, the income survey is done by a third party not associated with the project. So we don't want the engineer or the fiscal advisor doing that. And we don't want an income survey done just for the fact to lower the MHI in hopes that they get more grant. That is not authorized. And then for going back to our RD, the application, we want you to make sure you review that in depth to ensure that all your figures and amounts that you've entered match the information in your PER. That's huge for us. We see that all the time where that that information is mismatched, and it holds up the application when we have to get clarification on it. So, let's see here. I'm trying to do the don'ts too. So don't submit the application if the volume flow, connections, project costs, and financial information in the PER doesn't match what you have put into RD Apply. And then we want you to include multiple housing unit or mobile home park as residential if they have individual meters. Include them as commercial if they have one master meter. We need vacant parcels listed in the PER. In RD Apply, it does not ask for that, so it has to be in the PER. And be consistent in project name. For example, town's district formation name and the name of the project should be the same as the name in the PER. And then some other don'ts. We don't want you to lump all your administrative costs and engineering costs together in RD Apply. Those have to be broken out. And we don't want you to include an RD loan grant funding in the PER, your estimated what you think is going to be. We do that. And do not include O&M expenses in the short-lived assets, or include the short-lived assets over 15 years. And then lastly, we don't want you to provide a high water cost or high usage in the PER without explanation. Any questions? At the end, questions? Yep.
All right, I think this is working for me. My name is, that's okay, we won't rub it in anymore. My name is Lauren Townley. I'm with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I oversee our Water Quality Improvement Project grant program, as well as our non-point source planning and MS4 mapping grant. So I'll just get started. One of these is not on here already, I just noticed, but starting your application early, we are part of the consolidated funding application. We do not have any control over that online system. So if you do run into any technical issues, we do have to relay you back to the CFA staff that handle that system. And if you wait till the last minute, we can't guarantee that we can give you assistance. So starting as early as possible, giving yourself time in case you do run into issues with that online system. Another thing is a recommendation to definitely read the whole program overview, the RFA. Don't just focus on your project type. So there are project type specific information, but there is information that's applicable to all project types at the beginning of the program overview. And then there's information at the end of the program overview that is applicable to all contracts. So just want to make sure everybody's reading the whole document. We understand it's long, but jumping to those sections that are relevant is important. The other thing, definitely attach everything that is required. We cannot contact you if there are missing attachments. Some of them are eligibility requirements as well, so you won't even make it to scoring if something is missing. We will also kick you out for eligibility if some of those attachments are not completely filled out. So what we see is some of the signatures are missing on the sexual harassment prevention certificate. It's a one-page form, but a missing signature will make you ineligible, as well as the Executive Order 16 form that's also required. Again, one-page form. If it's missing any information, it makes you ineligible. The other thing is that the CFA online system does not notify you if an attachment or something is missing. So you cannot rely on that to notify you. It will allow you to submit. What we will note is that if you notice that something is missing and you've already submitted your application, there is an ability to clone your application in the system and then resubmit it with the attachments. So just keep an eye out for that as well. Do make the connection to water quality. This is a water quality improvement grant. So how the project is going to benefit water quality is important to document in the application, and making sure that the receiving water body that is benefiting from the project is correctly identified as well. And then just to note that reviewers will only review the information in your application. Do not assume that they are the inspector for the wastewater facility or they have any knowledge of the permit. It could be a completely different reviewer that has no background, the applicant. Some tips for the budget, making sure it's filled out completely is important, and that only eligible costs and activities are in the grant. I know we talked about contingency this morning. For WQIP, contingency is not an eligible cost. So it can be built in to the other lines, like for construction, but do not list contingency on its own. That will make it, it will not make you ineligible, but we will ding you in points for scoring purposes. So making sure that everything in your budget is important. Making sure your match is sources as well, and that the requested amount in the budget form, that's the attachment, matches the application. We see different numbers occasionally. And making sure that you have the correct budget. So we have seen that before where it's a different budget for a different project. That Am I losing this? Oh, sorry. I talk with my hands and it makes it difficult when you have to hold the microphone. And then just some other tips that we've seen, if you are working on behalf of multiple municipalities, making sure you're not mixing up the documents. We have seen that where it's from the wrong municipality, things get switched. Or if a municipality is applying and has multiple applications, we've seen attachments get mixed up between applications as well. And then again, for the forms that are required, making sure that the applicant is the one signing them, not your company. And I think I covered everything.
Hi, Eric Arena. I'm with the New York State Department of State, Division of Local Government. So just a quick synopsis, the local government efficiency grants, and I wanted to make sure we got this in here as well. So their due date, there's a re-release. We have them every several months for that application process. So quick overview, local government efficiency grant has multiple, but you can apply for multiple projects. And important notes here for those. One, it has to be a service that's going to be shared with at least one other entity. So 2 or more, and showing some shared services. So projects that are eligible include like EMS services, infrastructure, water and wastewater treatment, and cybersecurity, because obviously that's a big issue now. So there are a variety of projects like that to apply for. Important to note, and all of this is available on our website. I also have business cards I can give you because I don't have the presentation in front of me. But this is really quick, but it's important because we have this re-release of the application program for LG specifically. It's coming up. The May 1st is the deadline. Another important date is April 19th. That's the last date for questions and updates, but we are there to help you. It's, I don't want to say generic, but the projects are varied. So when anyone calls and says, hey, does this project eligible? 9 times out of 10 will say, yeah, it looks like it could be. It's competitive, of course. They're all rated when the application is submitted, but the grant money's there. And we have about, I think this year's budget, 2024's 1.3 million was allocated for specifically the LGE grant program. So that's in this year's budget. So again, more information on our website, but important, we just wanted to get that out there that re-release is going to be coming up May 1st. That'll be the first one. And then obviously going through the year, then you can apply for more going forward.
Thanks. Charlie again here with the CDBG program. I added it on the fly here, if that's okay. So with respect to the dues, make sure you're reviewing the current request for application. We make updates to that every year. So I know a lot of folks look at last year's as kind of a reference point, and that's fine, but just make sure you're reviewing the requirements for the program year that you're applying in. We give you a submission checklist. Make sure that that's clearly outlined and that you've got all the pieces attached in there. Again, what happens is once the CFA is submitted, the deadline closes, we have a gag order that kicks in and I can't talk to you. So again, it's just important to make sure that you've got all those pieces in there, before the final process. CDBG requires a public hearing. You have to notify the public that you're intending to apply for the funds. So make sure that that's corrected or is done correctly. I don't have any wiggle room on this. This is covered under state municipal law. So make sure your notice in the newspaper that you've documented that correctly, that you've given the proper notice period. And Governor Hochul signed another additional requirement that you have this secondary level of notice where you can show that it's posted to your municipal website, it's posted to the front door to the municipal office building, that additional documentation. So just make sure that that's all documented. If you're off by a day, you're off by a day and I can't accept it. It's going to kill your application. Look at your local priorities. Again, this needs to be project-based funding. What happens is, not so much now, but in the past, we had municipalities that would just apply for money just because the funding was available without a real project in place. So just look at your local priorities. If you've got a strategic plan, master plan, reference that, and just note that this is the priority of the community, and that's why you're applying for funding. Read the regs, read the requirements. We encourage co-funding with the partners here, but we've all got our own rules and regulations. One of the things to keep in mind is that $1 of CDBG into the project is going to trigger our rules across the entire scope of the project. So just make sure before you go down that path, it's CDBG is still a good fit for you. Local administrative and financial capacity is a big issue. On our funding round this year, the admin capacity and financial capacity is lumped into one category. It's worth 70 points. You have to hit 50 out of 70 to be considered for funding. And then you have to hit a total score of 65 out of 100 to be above the funding line to be in line for potential funding. But this is especially the financial capacity side. It's having your plan of finance has to be complete. CDBG has to be last in, and you can clearly show that CDBG funds are to fill a budget gap or to make the project more affordable. In terms of the local administrative capacity, it's that you've got the ability to take this on, you can handle it. You might be a small community, but you can show that you're working with reputable firms. I want to make a joke, present company excluded, but I like working with some of you guys. But just, again, just if you're a smaller community, just make sure you've got your partners are locked up and that you've got people in place, the fiscal advisors, consultants, engineers. You've got everybody in play to help you through the process. If you've got other resources in play, if you've got other community development activities that you're undertaking right now, just doesn't necessarily may not be part of the project, but it helps to show your and your ability. It's just a little bit and you'll lose it. Couple of things I added to this on the fly is CDBG has to comply with what we call national objective. CDBG is a program to assist low and moderate income communities. So you have to clearly demonstrate in the application how you're meeting the LMA, the low and moderate area income benefit standard. That's that 51% benefit that you guys heard me drill into your minds the last 20 years. We have to be able to show that 51% of the users, the residents of the district, the village, the city, who's ever benefiting, 51% have to be income eligible. And you have to clearly demonstrate that this is either from census data that we have available or your income survey can clearly show the 51% benefit. The other thing, and I'm going to give a shout out to EFC here for a second, not the other EFC, but the state EFC. They do the CATs, the community assistance teams. I love that this is back. And I can't stress enough that, doing the consultation with CATs, it doesn't serve anybody's benefit to call me up and talk to me and then talk to RD and then talk to EFC. Nick will coordinate the call, get everybody online together, and we can hammer this out to make sure that, again, there's still room for CDBG. Oftentimes projects have their plan of finance together and you've got grants and loans. and you want to go after the CDBG funds to reduce your loan obligation, when in reality, the other sources may just simply displace other grant funds already made available. And if that's the case, there's no reason to apply. Some of the don'ts, and this is a big one because this has hurt a few projects. And I talked about this earlier, the choice limiting actions. So if you start construction prior to receiving the release of funds from us, your project is done. I can't touch it, and that's not my policy. That's the HUD policy. Make sure you've got a very clear plan of finance in place. If you've got a large project or a small project, I have to see every dollar is in place. Make sure that all your sources are clearly outlined in the budget table. Make sure you're showing administrative capacity. I talked about this. Just shut this off. No? Okay. Again, the administrative capacity, making sure that you can show that this is missed every year. The capacity for financial capacity is missed. We talk about this 1.5% target rate for users, and that's 1.5% of median household income. If your project is coming in with a 0.5% user rate, I'll be honest with you, you probably don't have a good chance of getting funded. So these are all important things to think about, talk about, and look at in your application. Don't apply to CDBG first. Again, I have to be last in. The other piece is, just because the funding is available, don't apply for CDBG. This has to be a project-based approach. You need to have you have to have a well thought out process. John and Brenda are sitting in the back of the room. I'm going back to the days when Titus was still here with the villages of Bolivar and Richburg. It was like a 5-year process, I think, that we went through with the two communities to get their plan of finance before they're ready to get off the ground. That's what we're here for. So again, it's important to use us and take advantage of us. But again, CDBG has to be last in, and I can't stress that enough.
Do you have any questions from the audience? No? Nothing online? All right, great. Well, thank you all. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for rising to the challenge of the microphone as well. Notice I'm up here. So we're going to move on to funding efficiency, applying for multiple grants and loans to support projects. We're hoping this will be more of a discussion-based approach. So my challenge to you, the funders, to explain how one agency's funding affects one another. For example, which one comes first, match, etc. Discuss how projects are chosen, preference and point system, and how agencies can come together to co-fund projects.
Well, yeah, I'm scared to have this back. I guess I'll kick it off. So, again, this is Liz at EFC, specifically talking about, I'll use the WEA and the IMG grant program. Our SRF loan program can kind of be coupled with any co-funding, and we can create a full package for the community. But specifically with our WEA and our IMG programs, both for the clean water and the drinking water side, we determine your WEA grant based on net eligible project costs. So that means if your project has been awarded a grant, say from WQIP or RD or any funding agency, before we calculate how much you're eligible for, we'll take your total project costs from your application and take right off the top any awarded grants from other co-funding agencies. So that's done first, and then we'll go through the calculation based on either program to determine your grant award. We do the same thing after award. So if we are developing your project finance agreement or grant agreement after award, and you are lucky enough to get another grant from another agency, we do that throughout the life of your project through long-term conversion or like closing out the project. We always right size your grant based on those other co-funding partners. So just making that, highlighting that for communities or consultants, because sometimes they're kind of surprised when the WEA grant goes down for that reason. But I try to sell this as a good story, at least for WEA, because the award letter that you have that you'll get after award is a not to exceed amount. So if you do receive co-funding after award, we will reduce your WEA grant for that moment in time. But say you have a cost increase during construction because your bids come in high, or you have field changes that increases your project cost, we'll let you increase your grant to cover that. So I like to remind communities that you can still get up to that not to exceed amount. We just won't give you anything above that award letter after announcements based on scope changes or things like that. And how we also can overlap or benefit for other projects. So if you receive a WQIP grant that typically, it only covers construction, right? Yeah, only covers construction. That can, if you have an SRF loan or you have a WEA grant, our funds can pay for planning, design, all the way through construction. So it's a good way to kind of help bridge that. Our loan program or grant can kind of pay for things that other funding agencies can't pay for. And also in terms of MWBE participation, which is one of our program requirements for state funding. So both on the SRF loan and WEA programs and also WQIP. We've had some projects where our program compliance group will communicate with DEC and will decide who's going to be the agency that does the utilization plan and MWBE sign off. So you won't have to do it with both agencies. That will be communicated between agencies, and you'll have one point of contact. So we try to make that efficient. You don't have to do it for both agencies. And the last thing I'll note is if even $1 of SRF funds gets put into a project, and it's either a drinking water project or a treatment works, a wastewater project for the Clean Water SRF program, it does trigger AIS, American Iron and Steel requirements on the entire project. So sometimes, I know that's not necessarily a co-funding coordination question, but I know sometimes people ask, well, maybe I'll use my other funding agency to pay for this, or let's just take it out of the project and we'll pay for it ourselves. Just know you can't separate or bifurcate your project like that. Everything will have to comply with AIS because our SRF requirements kind of trump the whole thing. Do you have anything to add on the? If you don't, I'll pass it on. Okay.
Something just to build on what Liz was saying about net eligible project costs. Something that I think Liz and I talked about earlier, that there's a slight difference is with drinking water. If, say, a project was previously awarded like a DWSRF hardship grant and loan of like $3 million when that was the old cap, we could award WEA up to 2 million. So it's not necessarily subtracted out the same way as like an outside grant, but basically we can just match up to the 5 million cap between the programs on something like that. Another thing just for SRF projects in regards to co-funding, if we receive a written commitment of co-funding, something like a letter of conditions from RD, that does give you 10 points in our DWSRF scoring system, which that could be important for projects because we have subsidized rate lines and like the hardship line on our IUP annual list. And if that 10 points puts you above that line, that could help you get a better loan deal, certain things like that.
Okay, can everybody hear me? There we go. Brenda Smith, Rural Development. Probably the biggest thing, we tend to be the first one in a project, as far as loan and grant goes. We cannot pre-finance the 25% WEA holdback. So if you are getting the WEA grant, and there's the 25% holdback, our RD grant funds cannot pre-fund that. So make sure your communities know that they're going to have to do that from their own resources, or go out when they do their ban, they're going to have to ban for that holdback. So that's probably one of the biggest things we see with the co-funding on the WEA side anyway. With our funding, we can reduce in re-underwrite the project. So if you get a WEA grant or a CDBG comes in after the funding is already obligated for RD, we will re-underwrite it down to what we call similar systems. The minute the user cost gets below similar systems, then I have to take grant money away. So obviously we try to avoid that at all possible. But we typically come in first, have everything obligated, and then we can re-underwrite after the fact as long as the user cost doesn't go below similar systems. Lately, we've actually been working with some projects. When you do the RD Apply application, if you put in there that you're going to be applying for, say, 2 million from Charlie or a WEA grant, we will actually include that in the project now in our letter of conditions. We will not specify the agency. We will just specify other funding. That allows us to reduce our grant at the beginning and not at the end. And then if that happens, if you don't get the funding, then obviously we got to look at subsequent funding from RD if you don't get the award. But it's allowed us to fund projects with lower grant and taking into consideration other people's grant money. Our national office doesn't like us to re-underwrite, but we have been doing it for years, so we'll continue to do it until they tell me I can't do it. But that's kind of got to make them happy, right? So I think the biggest thing, we co-fund a lot. We try to make sure we're not displacing each other. So Charlie's always last in, so we typically will end up funding something in rural development, and then somebody else will come in, but we have the option to re-underwrite, so that's a good thing. We can obligate the funds without the award letter, but we would need to have the award letters prior to going to bid, prior to getting ready to start construction. One of the big things with RD is RD grant funds are always last out. So when you plan your project, plan that, take that into consideration that RD grant funds will always be last out if you have grant funds from us.
Everything before, so I think Liz covered a lot for WQIP already, which is great. But one thing I'll just mention that what we typically see and we encourage folks is to essentially start with EFC if you want to get an engineering planning grant. You can use that to meet our requirement for a final engineering report to come in for the implementation funding under WQIP. And alternatively, if you're doing a non-point source project, like a green infrastructure project is a good example, you can apply to DEC first, get a non-point source planning grant, and then use that to either apply for our implementation funding, or you could go back to EFC for the green infrastructure grant program. So we're trying to cover all of our bases between the two agencies for both planning and then the implementation funding. So we do meet regularly with the agencies too, and I'll just make another plug. Charlie mentioned the community assistance teams, the CATs. We are doing consultations across the board pretty frequently now. And that's a great opportunity to kind of get the lay of the land of all the different funding sources and get into, the nitty gritty of your project. And, we can talk about phasing and then timing of some of the applications as well on those consultations. So just want to make a plug for that. That's through EFC's website. We could probably share the link for that too, but that's a great starting point.
So Brenda just mentioned, again, I've said this before, CDBG has to be last in, but I'll let you have our money first out. So that is a nice incentive, because again, we don't pre-finance. I can't pay for any pre-financing, but we have no objection to our funds being out the door first. In terms of the budget review, and again, this is just a big thing, just making sure that your budget is really detailed. I need to know all the pieces to it. Don't leave any gaps in it. Don't be ambiguous with it. Just be straightforward. With us, it's the last thing you want to do is if you leave us with the impression that there's a potential gap in funding, it could have a significant impact on your application. I'm expecting this to be a fairly competitive round for 2024. We've increased the funding limit for co-funding to $2 million. It's up from 1.25 from prior years. And without co-funding, the cap is up to 1.5 million. So again, just based on that, I'm expecting this to be a fairly competitive cycle. We've talked a lot about the co-funding, but one of the things that I'm required to do with my underwriting is once the applications come in, I pull a report and it's based on your budgets that you submit. And I'm going to get on the phone with Brenda and EFC, and we're going to start talking about you guys. I have to confirm that the information that you've provided to me is accurate and it's confirmed. If there's something in the application where you're stating that you've got funding in hand, and I talk to EFC or to Brenda and it's not, it's going to kill your application. So again, just making sure I can't stress enough that your funding at application, your co-funding has to be available and committed at the time of application. I literally cannot talk to you once the application is submitted. So again, if you've got any questions about it, just pick up the phone and give me a call and I'll walk you through the process and we can coordinate with the co-funding partners. And Lauren just talked about this, about the phasing. Again, that's a great way to approach some of these projects. I've done that with a lot of you in the past. Again, I need to see the entire scope of the project. Don't just give me the CDBG portion that we're paying for, but I need to see the whole thing. And usually on some of these larger projects, we can phase things, we can segment, I can pull a piece out of, and this is it contract that I'm talking about, and we can pay for things that way. And that's a great way to approach some of these projects. Remember, these are 2-year terms that we have. So again, just when you're looking at this, just making sure this is part of your administrative capacity. Think about whether or not you can complete these projects within 2 years of the award. It seems like a nice, chunk of time, but it's 2 years is going to go by pretty quickly. And when you're trying to combine all the rules and regulations with multiple funding sources, there's going to be delays, there's going to be hiccups, things get delayed. It just make sure you've got all the pieces covered.
Any questions? Yes. The question is, if there's private funding, does that count against the grant?
Okay, so there are certain funding pots that don't affect it. So I'll say that the ARPA funds that communities get, those do not get backed out because those are awarded to a community generally, not a project specifically. So we've made the determination or policy internally that we won't back ARPA funds out of a project for net project costs. But if you've received grant funding, I'll just kind of throw a couple examples like congressional funding for those community grants that have come out, those would get backed out. I've seen like a DOCS grant or money being turned over that would get backed out as co-funding. So it kind of depends. If you have like a unique one, I would probably just recommend to email the NYS water grants email address just to double check so you kind of know for your project planning whether or not it would get deducted or not. Our finance group is a little bit more well-versed on some of the stuff that we would back out, but those have been examples of things I've seen in the past. I will mention that the nuance between the clean water and the drinking water program is for the clean water WEA grants, we do not back out any EFC awarded grants. So if you've received a bill grant or a CDBG grant, EPG grant, those do not get backed out of your total project cost. If you're lucky enough to get an enhanced WEA, which is new this year for a 50% grant, and you got a 50% bill grant, in theory, you could get 100% grant from us. That's probably going to be pretty rare. On the drinking water side, though, EFC awarded grants are backed out, or like Will said, we're kind of a one for one. You know, you won't get a DWSRF grant and a WEA grant. You're capped at that 5 million. So just keep that in mind. Gives you a little bit more flexibility for the WEA side for clean water grants. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions?
No.
Yes. Miranda again.
Is there any funding available for private residents that want to take on the burden of creating a water district and build a water system and turn it over to the town, but the town has no desire to entertain that residence? Infrastructure that will come to the town, and I'm sure that I'm probably the only municipality that sees this all the time. Right? But I'm from the town of Syracuse. It's a very affluent community. The wells are poor, so everybody wants to be on. The town has been approached 4 times within the last 2 years, and at one point, the town, the private residents did fund it, but ultimately, my question is there a mechanism for private residents to try to get away or to get a way to fund the project that will then be turned over as municipal infrastructure?
You have a question too?
And they will form it as well.
So for the WEA program, you have to be a municipality to apply for the program, so that wouldn't work there. And the SRF loan programs generally can't give money to just private residents themselves. I believe there is an ability for certain like private systems to receive loan money if they're regulated by PSC, but that wouldn't apply to what you're describing. So I think unfortunately you're out of luck in that situation.
I know this isn't directly related, but since it's adjacent, I'll figure I'd just add on. I know for what I've seen on the clean water side, and I think it would be related to drinking water, is we sometimes do see municipalities that do want to take over private systems. And if they come in as the applicant and they have an agreement or information in place to show that's going to be turned over to them, and ultimately the municipality is taking out the loan and the financing and responsible for that, that's something that can be, ongoing before we close the loan and the project's constructed. But in terms of pure private applicants for the Clean Water Treatment Works loan grant program, the drinking water program, they all have to be municipally, has to go to municipalities. We can do private applicants for like GIDP or decentralized systems, but it's pretty restrictive to municipal applicants for most of the stuff that we fund.
On the RD side, we pretty much deal with municipalities. We do, we can't deal with not-for-profits. If a not-for-profit was to apply, say a homeowners association, or if they're registered not-for-profit. The problem with that is it's very hard to show repayment ability because there's so few users typically in an HOA. So we have a hard time with getting the eligibility through on those ones. But that's really the only thing that could happen with RD would be the some sort of a not-for-profit entity applying.
Yeah, so DEC doesn't deal with the drinking water side of things, but we do deal with replacement of inadequate septic systems. So in that case, if a municipality does apply and they are connecting private residences, we can pay for the laterals to connect to those properties. So in that case, we could be doing work on private property. And then on the non-point source side, the private resident cannot be an applicant, but a soil and water conservation district or a municipality can apply and do work on private property as long as there's a landowner agreement in place.
Just really quick, just to add, and this is not a definite, this is just an option. I was thinking of a possible option, a public referendum to put on the ballot, possibly. I don't know specifically if if the public referendum to put an initiative, this particular initiative on the ballot, would that be an appropriate, allowed, but a public referendum, again, to put an initiative on the ballot might be something to explore.
Just a point of clarification, Skinny Atlas goes through the Onondaga County Consortium, so statewide program, you're not through me, but again, other instances I can work with private systems. We do a lot of that in manufactured housing parks. And again, we can also pay for the lateral connections to the individual households that are determined to be income eligible.
Sorry, I'm joining late. I missed the lunch. I'm coming from Rochester, New York. Ram Srivastava from Larson Engineers. This basically deals with this current situation where recently, is NYSERDA one of the agencies here? Okay, but I will describe the background. NYSERDA has a program, 25 million, 100% grant for municipalities, no local match, if they do the climate smart things. And they have a rating system with 1 star, 2 star, up to 5 star. And a community can get up to $250,000 grant for planning and implementation of green infrastructure. Our expertise is in sustainability and green infrastructure, so it's of great interest. It came out in January, but all the money has to be obligated by September 30th. That's only 6 months left now, 6 months left. It's very hard for municipalities which have not started the journey going 1, 2, 3 stars to spend the dollars, and then what happens if the money is gone? We spend the dollars and there's no longer funds left because it is first come, first serve. So we have suggested to municipalities, towns and villages that the private sector will be willing to start the planning for a solar farm, which is community solar farm up to 2 to 5 megawatts. The site selection, everything will be done by the private sector. All you have to do is provide some dollars as a good faith effort. So it may cost $75,000 to get the permit, but we only will say $10,000 is your obligation. So it is a co-funding type of situation because the real funds, dollar funds to build the system come from NYSERDA after you got the permit. So it's that time from which takes 6 to 9 months from any town or village to get a solar permit. It's getting easier in now and hopefully in future. So who spends the money to get the permit? So now we can get the NYSERDA grant and the credits, federal tax credits. This is all under Inflation Reduction Act. A community could get up to 50, 60% of the capital for the solar farm. But nobody is at this stage ready to go take the risk and start all day one, because even though private companies get the tax benefits and they can use it against tax payments, municipalities are not a taxpayer. A church is not a taxpayer, it's a nonprofit. But they can get the same exact dollar amount of grants from IRA if they went ahead and built their own solar system. So I'm looking ahead, communities could have their own. Which funding agency here, I know for housing and community development, there are grants for electrification. So in that scenario where private sector is willing to build the power system to serve their electrical energy need, are there issues that some agency will say, well, if it's private sector, then we can't do that? Wrong question, but I had to explain to these people.
I know we're water centric today, but maybe one of you would want to speak to your planning grants. Okay, great.
I'm not sure if I can full answer your question. We do, in our Green Innovation Grant Program, we do have a category for energy efficiency that we could actually pay for municipally owned photovoltaic cells. But unfortunately for our program, it has to be specifically for like powering or providing power to a treatment work system, to like a treatment plant or other municipal facility related to wastewater treatment. So we're not broad enough to cover the situation that you're talking about here, but I figured I'd just mention that, you know, we can pay for energy upgrades at plants, whether that is doing, you know, biogas systems to heat your plant, or PV cells at the plant to help circle back energy. That is something that we can pay. That's kind of above and beyond our typical green infrastructure. So sorry, I didn't fully answer your question, but that's what we can offer.
Under rural development, we wouldn't have anything that we could do it to assist in any programs.
Same boat for DEC. Maybe Charlie does.
Well, again, it's our planning, the technical assistance side is pretty broad. We can pretty much include any activity. We could do something like that. The planning is capped out at 50,000, but you'd still have to show that the beneficiaries, but you have to be able to show that you can take this to implementation. It can't just be a report. It's got to be something that results in implementation. And at implementation, you can show that the population benefiting hits that 51% low income benefit threshold. But again, it's under the infrastructure side of the funding, the larger grant program. You know, we can do public utilities. I'm working with the Village of Bath right now down in Steuben County, so it is, you know, potentially something like that we could work with you on in the future.
There you go.
So just, we've changed under the housing program. The only thing that we're doing on large rental property right now is, I know you missed the earlier part this morning, but we're doing what we call water and sewer in support of existing housing. So I don't really have anything on the housing side where this would qualify right now.
Do we have any other questions? That's perfect. Great.
Are HABs ever going to be considered emerging contaminants or climate change? How are we going to treat those?
Funding for HABs. Looking at you.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of how, I mean, in terms of our scoring criteria, we do take into consideration water bodies that have implementation plans, clean water plans, or have been documented to be impaired. I think that's kind of the starting point. So from the grant perspective, but I think this is like a deeper question of, you know, how do we capture HABs and climate change and emerging contaminants in our overall program? So that's definitely like a bigger question that's not in my shop. So, you know, maybe I can follow up. If you want to give me your contact information, that'd be good. Skinny Atlas. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But we all try to work together because that would make most sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll turn it over to EFC and DOH because I think they have some specific funding for emerging contaminants too. Keep getting stuck.
I will lead. So I will add that we use the DEC documentation for the priority water body listings, PWLs, which are based on the water quality sampling that's done We use that directly with our SRF score system. So if you've ever wondering, like, how does EFC come up with your water quality score? That's the majority of the information that we use. So if a project is doing some sort of nutrient removal or addressing something that is identified in a PWL for HABs, for example, we've scored projects additional water quality points because they're addressing a known documented HAB in the water body. So we are addressing that. We do have a funding pot for the bipartisan infrastructure law bill specifically for emerging contaminants. Unfortunately, we've tried to work with EPA because that money comes from EPA. And when we first were given that money, because it's the first time that emerging contaminants had really been coming into the wastewater sector, at least from our perspective, we immediately were like, okay, well, can we give this money to nutrient removal projects that have HABs? They told us no, that's not what they wanted. So unfortunately, we're limited there, but we're kind of hoping by working, seeing how the PWLs are updated over time for HABs. We're actually going through an effort of reviewing a lot of the watershed management plans that have been done throughout the state because our SRF loan score system looks at approved watershed management plans that we can try to give additional points for projects. So we're going through an effort to look at all the DEC approved plans that are kind of above and beyond some of the federal ones that we already use. And we're obviously seeing a huge trend for emerging contaminants in general and HABs specifically. So we're trying to make sure that we can squeeze out as many points as we can for projects. But yeah, unfortunately, we can't use the bill money specifically for HABs, but we're trying to get other areas where we can.
So in drinking water, the HABs projects we primarily deal with are like treating for microcystin or something in the water. And we have seen projects with that get funded through our NYWEA program, and those could be funded through our base DWSRF loan program too, and the Bill General Supplemental Program. We also specifically have the Bill Emerging Contaminants funding, which we do have some, I believe, at least one microcystin treatment project listed on that list currently. The thing about that program is the Bill EC, like we were given directive by EPA that we have to prioritize PFAS projects. So the likelihood of us getting to like a microsystem treatment projects, it would have to be after we address all the higher scoring projects that address PFAS. So there are avenues that we have to fund something like in treatment, but at least the Bill EC, it's primarily PFAS.
Any other questions? When are the CFAs?
So we don't have the exact date, but we anticipate May. So it'd be likely on the normal schedule. So opening May and then open through end of July. That's all we've been told so far.
Bill, you mentioned co-funding and the 10 points that you can get through the DWSRF program. Is there any threshold on that co-funding? So an example would be a county who's trying to undertake a bunch of complete streets projects, and they don't want to do that until a certain village improves their underground infrastructure, water, sewer, and stuff like that. So they incentivize them by paying $5,000 for the PER or something kind of minor like that in the grand scheme of things. Would that still allow you to grant that community the 10 points for co-funding? Something like that?
Yeah, so my understanding and my view is if there's written commitment of co-funding, it doesn't necessarily have like a minimum type amount in regards to that. We just need to see like a written letter commitment that they've been awarded grant funds.
Anyone else? No? So I'm going to give you a 10-minute break. We still have coffee outside and there's some sweets left over from lunch. And then Liz and Will, I'm hoping to go over the slide deck that you submitted. It has some additional information on your grant programs. Yeah, so I think that would be about 20 minutes. I do believe Charlie has to take off. So if you need to talk to him before he leaves, grab him. Yeah. All right. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Yes. Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all very much. Perfect. Did you pause? Oh, okay. This is just so they'll know when we reconvene. So I can bring up their.
Say hi in person. Got a couple times. Yeah. Yeah, it's those folks that like you're not tired and
What's exciting about it now, first of all, it's not really this year, it's over there, because it's probably small project. You're gonna think, well, let's take ammonia away.
Parks are harder, if they're private owned, so
Right.
our company can make much of we use how they choose to. We do see sometimes where, municipalities will say, all right, we will, act upgrade, so if they're high in our human, we fund those, but yeah.
And cheaper than what you're saying. If you work with these folks, you can give them the power. Yeah. Because everyone wants it. You just need the outcome. Their problem is solved very easily. The solution that you would like to see in this way, but it's big, you recycle the bag. Artificial urban forest and irrigate them with that, so the water goes up. But only dry condition, hard warm condition. Zero flow. The dry mid stream standard is June, July. You just apply as when the flow is not there. So we can do a
Seems like more elevated.
Yes.
Solution.
Right, so. Some funds, you know, solar is. Planning and. You got them to plan, it's moving on fire, before going. I said, we were to build a system, we're gonna change everybody's focus. Have solar power, water recycling, all the. Solar power. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no, I think.
Finding a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
Learn from the. You said the solution.
Yeah, but I think I'll take a look at you guys, you know, I think, and that would be part of the update process. I'm pretty sure that it's limited to, municipal treatment works. We did get it right on, we probably worked with the staff in your program. I know that we have interviews with also to have an innovation category, but I don't know, maybe there's opportunity for, I don't know, that might be specific to infrastructure, that would have to be like innovative, you don't have to your solution. But yeah, he would be the one that does something like that. And do it for everyone.
It's innovative. It's having big giant sucking plants growing there and putting it in the.
Yeah.
I'm saying, this is so much fun after. It's been so much many people. How did you know that?
Yes.
Willows, take the water out, put it in the air, have some walking trails for the people who live there.
Yeah, we'll give you like an idea of like, all right, cool idea, but it'll work with our program.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, kind of nice that it forces us different. Yeah, no problem. I mean, sometimes it's a little bit overlap from probably what we said during the presentation, but I think it's great, you know, we have some programs that are good to balance your time.
All right, we're gonna get started with our final presentation. But first, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of our funding agency representatives. Thank you for joining us today. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on this event, that it's been really helpful to stray from the normal presentation and take a different approach to this information. I also want to give huge thank you to the rest of my team, to Avery, who's been handling the Zoom and all of the virtual attendees, to Kristen and Maya, guys out there. They, the three of them together created that trivia game for lunchtime, and they helped with all of the marketing materials and the handouts. And so, yeah, I will turn it over to you.
That's okay. This will be fast. I had initially put the slide deck together, thinking we needed something more formal for the panel. So we'll just kind of flip through this to kind of wrap up for the day. Get there. There we go. All right. So we threw around a lot of acronyms, and obviously EFC overlaps with a lot of funding. So my initial thought was really just to put on one slide the different programs that we talked about throughout the day. So for folks that are familiar with EFC, you're going to see a couple of the standard slides, and you may be familiar with this, but just to summarize that we offer loan funding or financings for projects. So we have the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And so we provide low cost capital to municipalities for water and wastewater infrastructure projects. And depending on how your project scores, you know, you could get a market rate loan, a subsidized loan, or if you meet our hardship policy and are a disadvantaged community, you can even get a 0% interest loan. So that's what makes EFC's program so powerful when we talk about all of these other co-funding agencies, is that we can have our loan and have all these grants pulled together for a pretty powerful package to help fund your project. And we can even have projects that overlap between the clean water and the drinking water program. So City of Cortland comes to mind, and a couple other municipalities that have both water and wastewater infrastructure. They can apply to both of our loan programs. You can apply to both our grant programs. And we have staff that work with municipalities to delineate who pays for what, and you can close 2 loans, disperse funds on all that scope. And so even within EFC, we can co-fund together. So in addition to our loan programs, we have our state grants, which are primarily the WEA and the IMG grant programs that we're talking about today. We have other state grants. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because this is the whole suite of what EFC has to offer. So depending on what program you have, this is where it comes into play, you know, what federal or state requirements you might have and things you want to talk to EFC about to make sure you're on the right path. But we offer a lot of different grants in addition to the loan that we can give your community. And you can have, with the exception of WEA and IMG, you can't have a project that gets both of those, but you could couple all these other grant programs with a WEA grant or an FSRF loan. So we have our engineering planning grant that covers development of an engineering report. We have our WEA program in IMG, which basically are grants that cover the same realm of eligibility that the SRF loan program does. The Green Innovation Grant Program, which we talked about today for energy efficiency, green infrastructure, stormwater projects. We can also do water meter replacement projects. So if you have a system that doesn't have water meters, or you have really old water meters that leak, or you want to upgrade your meter reading systems to be more efficient, that's the grant program for you. It's very popular for municipalities that are looking for a way to get those funded. Of course, we have state revolving fund grants that are federal grants that kind of get added on top of our loans. Those are given at EFC's discretion in terms of which year we want to award them. We usually go in score order in our category D, which are hardship communities, and DOH does the same. It's given out in score priority for hardship communities. And then the bipartisan infrastructure law grants, which are our newest program for federal grants. So why we really like this is it is convenient one-stop shopping. If you need a loan, need a grant, you can get them both from us, pull in some other agency grants, and we can bundle it together for a full package. We do give communities short-term loans, which are for 5 years, which is great. Not a lot of other state revolving fund programs in the country offer this. And it's something that we can use to pre-finance other agencies' grants. WQIP is kind of the classic example. They only give funds for construction, and you have to incur those costs before you get the grant payments back. We can pre-finance all of those grants with our short-term loan, and typically up to 5 years. And think of it like a line of credit. You know, it can pay for your, once you close the loan, we can pay your engineering invoices, all your design work, all the way through construction. A contractor gives a community an invoice for a construction pay application. You can immediately send that to EFC, and within 1 week, we will disperse that money to you so you can pay your contractor. We're very quick. And then we can also, and then eventually we could convert that to a 30-year loan, or you could choose to close a 38-year loan with RD and just use our short-term financing. That's fine. So we work with our co-funding agencies that offer the grants and the loans for however you guys want to develop your project. For the WEA program, we didn't talk about this, but you do not need to use our SRF loan in order to apply for a grant. You could just come in and say you want a grant and pay for the rest of the project yourself. That's fine. A common question I get asked: do you give preference to projects with SRF loans when you're scoring WEA applications? We do not. So your project will get the same score whether you want SREF financing or not. Kind of the key is you need to demonstrate to EFC how you're going to pay for the rest of your project if you're not using our loan. So that's where a board resolution with your plan of finance comes into play, and just make sure you're explicit with how you're going to pay for the balance of the project. And yeah, so that's that last bullet, is just explaining to us how you're going to pay for your project. Yeah, this was really just put together to give more context for the WEA program. Clean water program, they have to be municipally owned sewage treatment works. The WEA program cannot pay for stormwater only projects, but we can fund, if you are doing sewer separation to reduce CSOs or SSO, or you have an SSO, well, that wouldn't be storm sewers, but if you want to separate your CSO system and you're installing new storm sewers, we can pay for that. But if you just want to help with drainage and install a storm sewer in your system, we would not be able to give you a WEA grant for that. On the drinking water side, it's pretty much everything that's eligible for the state revolving fund program. It has to be municipally owned public water systems. And just to highlight the differences between the grant programs, the clean water grant, we can give you 25% grant up to 25 million. New for this year, if you're not aware, we have what we're calling an enhanced WEA, that if you're a small, rural, or disadvantaged community, you can be eligible for 50% grant up to 25 million. We have more information on our website. That is defined as your community is under 3,500 population size, and you have to meet our hardship criteria in terms of MHI. But I don't have this here, but if you don't meet the MHI criteria, there's another criteria that you can try to meet if you're, based on your affordability. If you can prove that your project is like really expensive versus your MHI and how many users you have, you might be able to get in another way. But just keep in mind that that's new for next year. And we've notified communities that have been in our program in the past that this is an option for them. So if you have questions, let us know. On the drinking water side, the WEA grant portion is still the same, 60% up to 5 million. We've adjusted the emerging contaminant category that it's now 70% grant. Last year was 60. That does not have a cap, but the caveat is your project needs to address an emerging contaminant that is above the state determined MCL level. And if you have any questions about whether you are or not, you would reach out to DOH to confirm that. But we do evaluate that before we determine your award amount. So we'll either cap you or we won't. This just demonstrates what we mean by net eligible project cost, that we will, take your total project costs, back out any non-EFC awarded grants to come up with your net eligible cost. And then in the example here, I'm using the clean water 25%, but we would do that calculation, and just highlighting that, okay, for clean water, we won't back out your other EFC awards, but on the drinking water project, you're capped at 5 million of all those programs. For the intermunicipal grant program, this is for it's the same application as the WEA program. And I mentioned before, if you want to apply for IMG, you should also check the WEA grant box as well. But it's meant for one municipality that's undertaking a capital, more than one municipality is undertaking a capital improvement project. These are 40% grants up to 30 million. We would expect one municipality to take the lead on behalf of the others. And you're limited to receive, so if you're awarded a $30 million award, we internally just make sure we don't disperse more than 10 million each year. And that's just because we're trying to meet the language of the legislation, but we will give you up to the 30 million. For IMG, my suggestion would be, we do need to receive an intermunicipal agreement between all the municipalities that are participating in the project. And one of the things that we have to review for, and we may kick a project out for IMG, is if the IMA doesn't provide enough detail of exactly how the communities are working together on the project. So the classic example of what we don't want to see is just like a water service agreement that a community sells water to neighboring communities or provides sewer service. It really should be tailored to the project to explain like that they have shared infrastructure and they both have a vested interest into constructing the new infrastructure or maintaining it after the case. For example, other than like plant consolidation, which is kind of a classic case of what we want to see, you know, two municipalities, one's decommissioning their plant and they're consolidating it together for a new plant is a good one. We've also seen communities that are building a new collection system and choose to send flow to an existing plant rather than building their own. We've awarded those in the past. Interconnection of water systems is another good one that's scored well in the past. We do the same thing for IMG for backing out awarded co-funding. For IMG, we would back out the EFC clean water EFC funded project costs. Clean water and drinking water projects are evaluated together for the IMG program, so we have to make sure that we're evaluating them the same. New as of last year or so, we have an online application portal. This is used for both the SRF and the grant projects. It's through the same portal, and you would just identify on the website what application you're submitting. We've tried to improve it from last year that you can copy over your information between your WEA and your SRF applications. If you have complaints or gripes about our portal, I would love to hear it so I can work with our IT department to correct things. We've taken feedback from last year and tried to improve this year. So don't be shy. Let us know if we have room for improvement. But it is one single application for both the WEA and the IMG programs. You would just identify whether you're applying for a clean water project or a drinking water project. And you can now save progress drafts of those applications similar to the CFA process, so you don't have to do it all in one shot. And applications for the SRF program and WEA and IMG are due at the same time this year. It's June 14th. In the past, those dates have never lined up and it's caused a lot of confusion. So this year we tried. I can't believe it actually happened, but we got the dates to be the exact same. So hopefully that'll reduce some confusion on submittals. And the application requirements are the same between the between the SRF program and the WEA and the IMG program. And that includes your engineering report, your bond resolution if you're seeking SRF funding. If you're seeking grant funding without SRF, you have the flexibility to do a board resolution with Plan of Finance, but I can't stress enough to make sure your resolution actually explains how you're going to pay for the balance of your project. What we often see is communities upload the resolution from the community that authorizes them to submit the application. That's not what we're looking for. We want the resolution to actually explain how they're going to pay for the balance of the project. The environmental review, which we went over earlier, the SHPO letter, and the IMA if you're an IMG applicant. The big thing that we see is some communities will assume we have documentation in our file and they won't upload it because they think we have it. We've tried to change our application that forces you to upload the documents, whether you've submitted it to us or not, because we still have situations where you think we have it, we think we have it, we look, we don't have it, and then we have to make you incomplete. We'd rather not have that gamble and we just resubmit it to us so we know we have it. And also double check the file you're uploading, because I've seen where communities will upload a file that's called bond resolution and I open it and it's the resolution authorizing them to submit the application. I won't be able to reach out to you and ask you to resubmit unless you submit early and we look at it early. Then we can provide feedback. And as our workload allows, we will review applications before the deadline and give you feedback if something doesn't look right. But if we receive your application or don't look at your application until after the deadline, we go into a blackout period and we can't contact you. So please just double check your file is what you think it is and you upload everything of these minimum requirements. And then anything else is just going to supplement your application and we use it for scoring. We already went through all of these in the panel situation, but I think they're kind of worth just to see on the screen one more time. That second one, submitting applications early, can't stress that enough. I can't help myself. I have to open your application if you submit it. I love to go through what you have, and I'm like, I want to tell you if you're missing something. So let me help you. If you submit it early, we can look at it ahead of time. And let's see, for submitting required documents, the portal is forcing you to upload them separately. But I guess just resist the urge to combine documents if you think it's helping us to be more efficient. We actually prefer things to be separated so we can make sure you've submitted everything and it's saved to the file. Can't think of a really good example other than like maybe Seeker. Sometimes it all gets packaged up, all the files together. Sometimes we just prefer to see them separated because we're going to have to separate them anyways. And clearly label your files. That really helps us because we're going to rename them and it helps us not miss anything. Revisit your budgets. We've talked about that a lot. The grant only plan of finance. Please make sure it's clear how you're going to pay for it. Seeker reminder, we've covered that. Applicable terms and conditions. I really don't want to kick anybody out because they went to construction without our terms and conditions, so please include that. And give us a copy of your co-funding award letters. I mean, we can track them down. We obviously work with our partners to get copies of everything, but that's really helpful to make sure we're right sizing everything at the time. And that's what I have.
You have any questions? No, good. Oh, there it is. Things are huge.
Liz, for the $25 million cap, how many years, if community got 2 years ago, like how long does that 25 million cap last?
That is a question. In the we have limit 5 over 5 years. Don't do that cap anymore. So if you get 25 in 1 year, you can get 25 in the next year. What we'll do internally though is we may not disperse 5 million. We won't disperse more than 5 million a year. So we do kind of work that out in how we structure how the money goes out the door, because usually it's 25% of your grant gets dispersed first, then you jump to your loan, and then we disperse the last 25% of your grant on the back end. If you have a really large award like that, we wouldn't give you all 25% of a 25 million. We would kind of systematically chunk it out. But in terms of your eligibility to reapply for a $25 million loan your next year, you would be able to do that if you had an eligible project.
Do we have any other questions? All right.
So I'm not sure if this answers your question exactly, but any project that's primary purpose would be fire flow is ineligible for our funding programs. The primary purpose, like if it was a benefit of the overall project, it could still be eligible, but if the primary is fire flow, it is not eligible. Yeah, like fire hydrants can be replaced and benefits can be made, like if there's, say the infrastructure is aged and stuff, and a lot of aged infrastructure, low pressures in a lot of area, that's a good project that we can fund. But if you're describing in the report that this is mainly because you want to increase fire flows, and that is what you are emphasizing a lot in the report, we would not find that eligible for our programs.
Okay. Email us that question to every legal department to look at what sort of an IMA perspective of whether it needs to affect the IMA program. We probably have to defer that and see. It's a good one. Yes.
I'll just speak loud.
Okay.
This is a joint combined municipal type of situation. Pittsburgh area, there is the broad canal, the East Canal that goes on the way. So the canal corporation is looking for these ports where we used to be, places that goes to south and west and north, to be made sustainable and green. So they will attract more people to see and come and look at a facility to power by renewable energy and other things that are the same thing. Question is about stormwater. So most of these communities, under wet weather conditions, do have access flows that they are, they're looking for. Syracuse is a leader in them. Whole county was trying to encourage water conservation, recovering the water and reusing it. So town and village both, this is your village, is an portion, but it's also in the town. They both can combine and apply for a grant for infrastructure. This will be the parking areas in that basic area where all the shops and restaurants are. So the parking area is open. And we also know that climate change is bringing us warmer temperatures for more days. And we are becoming like DC, and DC is becoming like Texas, kind of in the next 50 years. Point is that sun shine during the summer months, temperature will go up. So shading is important. So these parking areas could be very well shaded to provide shade. Half of the parking lot of this surface will be solar panels, so it's working to harvest power. We can build collection system for rainwater collection, store it on site, and reuse it in the facility. So it's a multi-benefit project that they can apply for grant, but the grant is due in June or July. Deadline from the EFC. So that's pretty quick to move forward to apply for it. But is this idea eligible in one of those terms that EFC uses for? So I heard about stormwater, then we can do it. Well, we are in trouble with stormwater, it's not going to the creek. We are making power that's powering the local area. So it's a green infrastructure project located just on the port. And there are lots of communities that are on the canal. They could upgrade those facilities if the town can get it.
You want to go over maybe your GIGP program again? I'm gonna look at that.
I can send this whole thing to you.
Yeah, that would probably be best. So yeah, so the June deadline is just for our listing on the SRF program for our loans and for the WEA and the IMG program. So the stormwater work that you're describing, would it be eligible for the WEA and the IMG programs? We can certainly probably give you a loan for it, but most of the time those projects don't score as well. But the GIGP grant program is probably where it would best fit. That is part of the CFA process. So the grant program hasn't been announced yet. So similar to what DEC was saying for the WQIP program, it would be on those similar timelines. I'm not as well versed with all the eligibilities or the the specifics about the GIGP program. So I'd probably reach out separately to Brian Hahn in our group, who's can give you better guidance if it's something that would be competitive or would be eligible, but it would be under that program. Yep.
Okay. We have a question from our virtual participant, Rosie. Will there be additional funding made available for lead service line replacements?
Well, I wondered.
So as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a specific pot of money for lead service line replacement and lead service line inventories. This money was made available for 5 years, so that's the main pot of money we have there. Lead service line replacement projects could also apply for the NYWEA program. We have awarded a couple lead service line replacement programs there, but those are the main two pathways we have for funding lead service line replacement projects here. The bipartisan infrastructure law, lead service line. Yeah, from federal, yeah. Yeah, and for the bipartisan infrastructure law, lead service line replacement and inventory funding, you would have to be on the intended use plan for that project to be evaluated to receive the funding. $25 million, I thought as a maximum. How much money do you have? In so many towns and villages. I don't remember what the flows are for. What's the total for the other for? 320.
The years gone together. Yeah, we have over $300 million that are for the WEA program that covers the NIG of this year. That comes straight through the state appropriation, so they usually let us know how much grant to make available this year.
That's water and wastewater.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Another round of applause for all of our speakers today. So if you signed in requesting professional development hours, please make sure that you sign out at the registration table. These slides will be made available to you. You will be able to access them through our EFC website, but we will also send a follow-up email to participants. Our next event, we will be holding a funding roundtable, so it will not be focused on engineering as much. It's more of a generalized funding roundtable at the Tug Hill Local Council of Government Conference on May 1st at the Turning Stone Casino in Verona. So that's where you will catch us next. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.